When we speak of Carthage, we summon forth memories of purple-dyed merchants sailing beneath crimson sails, of war elephants thundering across alpine passes, and of a civilization so magnificent that Rome itself trembled at its power. Here was an empire built not on conquest alone, but on the marriage of commerce and courage, where Phoenician ingenuity transformed a North African refuge into the Mediterranean's most formidable maritime power, leaving behind a legacy that would echo through 28 centuries of human memory. The Phoenician Genesis. In the gentle waters of the eastern Mediterranean, where the mountains of Lebanon kiss the sea, there flourished a people whose destiny would reshape the ancient world. The Phoenicians, dwelling in cities like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, had mastered the art of navigation when most civilizations still feared the open ocean. These remarkable seafarers, pressed between the mountains and the sea in their narrow coastal homeland, turned limitation into opportunity, transforming themselves into the Mediterranean's premier merchants and explorers. The 9th century before the Common Era witnessed an extraordinary transformation in Phoenician society. Population pressure, political instability, and the eternal lure of profit drove these maritime pioneers to establish trading posts and colonies throughout the Mediterranean basin. From Cyprus to Sicily, from Sardinia to the shores of North Africa, Phoenician settlements sprouted like seeds carried on the wind, each one a node in an increasingly complex network of commerce and cultural exchange. Among these ventures, none would prove more significant than the foundation of Carthage, known to its inhabitants as Carthage, meaning new city. The traditional date of 814, before the Common Era, marks not merely the establishment of another Phoenician colony, but the birth of what would become one of antiquity's greatest powers. The story of its founding, wrapped in legend and historical truth, centres on a remarkable woman whose intelligence and determination would echo through the ages. Queen Elissa, known to the Romans as Dido, fled from Tyre following the murder of her husband Acabas by her brother Pygmalion, who coveted the priest's vast wealth. Taking with her a loyal following of nobles and commoners alike, along with the sacred objects of Melkart and a considerable treasure hidden from her brother's grasp, Elissa embarked on a journey that would transform from flight into foundation. The voyage itself became legendary, with stops in Cyprus where 80 young women joined the expedition as wives for the colonists, and where a high priest of Jupiter agreed to accompany them on the condition that his priesthood would remain hereditary in his family forever. When Elissa's fleet finally reached the North African coast, they encountered the indigenous Libyan peoples led by King Aabas. Here, according to the famous legend, Elissa's cleverness manifested in the founding tale that would define Carthaginian character. Agreeing to purchase only as much land as could be covered by a single ox hide, she had the hide cut into the thinnest possible strips, which when laid end to end encompassed the entire hill of Byrsa, the future citadel of Carthage. This story, whether historical truth or foundational myth, embodied the Carthaginian spirit of commercial shrewdness combined with intellectual ingenuity. The site chosen for Carthage possessed extraordinary strategic advantages that would contribute to its eventual dominance. Located on a peninsula jutting into the Mediterranean, the settlement commanded views of approaching vessels from tremendous distances. The natural harbours, later enhanced through remarkable engineering, provided safe anchorage for both military and merchant fleets. Fresh water flowed from nearby springs, while the fertile hinterland promised agricultural abundance. The proximity to Sicily, just 140 kilometres away, positioned Carthage perfectly to control the vital sea routes between the eastern and western Mediterranean. In those early years, Carthage grew steadily but unremarkably, paying tribute to the local Libyan peoples and maintaining close ties with its mother city of Tyre. The colonists brought with them not only material goods, but the accumulated wisdom of Phoenician civilization, knowledge of metallurgy, glass-making, purple dye production, and above all, the revolutionary alphabetic script that would influence writing systems throughout the Mediterranean world. The Carthaginians established workshops and markets, temples and residential quarters, gradually transforming their settlement from a simple trading post into a thriving city. The relationship with Tyre remained fundamental to early Carthaginian identity. Annual embassies carried a tenth of the public revenues to the Temple of Melkart in the mother city, maintaining spiritual and political bonds that would endure for centuries. This connection provided Carthage with legitimacy and support, while Tyre benefited from having a strong ally and trading partner in the western Mediterranean. Yet even as Carthage honoured these ties, the city developed its own distinct character, shaped by its unique position between the Phoenician, African, and eventually Greek and Roman worlds. The archaeological evidence from early Carthage reveals a settlement that quickly developed sophisticated urban planning. The earliest structures, dating from the late 8th century, show careful organisation and ambitious construction techniques. Houses were built with stone foundations and mud brick walls, often featuring central courtyards in the Eastern Mediterranean style. Pottery finds indicate extensive trade connections from the very beginning, with ceramics from Greece, Egypt, and various Phoenician settlements appearing alongside locally produced wares. Religious life in early Carthage centred on the worship of the traditional Phoenician pantheon, with Baal Hammon and his consort Tanit eventually emerging as the principal deities. The Tokpet, a sacred precinct dedicated to these gods, became one of the city's most important religious sites, though its exact nature and the controversial question of child sacrifice would become subjects of intense debate among historians. Temples were constructed following Phoenician architectural traditions, though gradually incorporating local and foreign influences that would give Carthaginian sacred architecture its distinctive character. The transformation from trading post to regional power occurred gradually over the 7th and 6th centuries, as Tyre faced increasing pressure from Assyrian and later Babylonian expansion. Its ability to support and control its western colonies diminished. Carthage, blessed with its advantageous position and growing wealth, began to assert leadership over other Phoenician settlements in the western Mediterranean. This process was not one of conquest, but rather of gradual assumption of responsibilities and privileges. As smaller settlements looked to Carthage for protection and commercial coordination, the indigenous peoples of North Africa played a crucial role in Carthage's early development. The Libyans, as the Greeks and Romans called them, were not a single unified people, but rather a collection of tribes and kingdoms with their own complex histories and cultures. Some groups, like the Numidians, who would later play such a significant role in Carthaginian history, maintained their independence while engaging in trade and occasional military cooperation with Carthage. Others were gradually incorporated into the expanding Carthaginian territory, their populations providing agricultural labour and military manpower. Intermarriage between Phoenician colonists and local populations created a unique Carthaginian identity that was neither purely Phoenician nor purely African, but something new and distinctive. This cultural fusion manifested in various ways, from religious practices that combined Phoenician and Libyan traditions to artistic styles that blended Eastern Mediterranean and North African motifs. The Carthaginian language itself, while remaining fundamentally Phoenician, incorporated Libyan loanwords and developed its own dialectical features that distinguished it from the language spoken in the Levantine homeland. The economic foundations of early Carthage rested on multiple pillars. Maritime trade remained paramount, with Carthaginian merchants sailing to ports throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. The city's position allowed it to serve as an intermediary between different economic zones, bringing tin from Britain, silver from Spain, gold from Africa, and grain from Sicily and Sardinia. But Carthage was not merely a commercial entrepot. It developed its own productive capacities that would eventually rival those of any ancient city. Agriculture in the Carthaginian hinterland evolved from subsistence farming to sophisticated commercial production. The Carthaginians introduced new crops and farming techniques from the eastern Mediterranean while adapting to local conditions and learning from indigenous agricultural traditions. The famous agricultural manual of Margot, though surviving only in fragments quoted by Roman authors, suggests a highly developed understanding of agronomy, animal husbandry, and estate management that would influence farming practices throughout the Mediterranean for centuries. The manufacturing sector of early Carthage showcased the technological sophistication inherited from Phoenician tradition and enhanced through local innovation. Purple dye production, using murex shellfish harvested from North African waters, continued the Phoenician monopoly on this luxury product that was worth its weight in silver. Metal working shops produced everything from agricultural tools to weapons, from jewellery to ship fittings. Glass workshops created vessels and ornaments that combined utility with artistic beauty. Textile production, particularly of fine linens and woolens, employed hundreds of workers and generated substantial export revenues. Shipbuilding emerged as perhaps the most crucial industry in early Carthage. The city's shipyards developed innovations in naval architecture that would give Carthaginian vessels advantages in both commerce and warfare. The famous Carthaginian round ships, with their broad beams and deep holds, could carry more cargo than Greek or Roman vessels of similar length. Military vessels, initially following Phoenician designs, gradually evolved to meet the specific challenges of Western Mediterranean warfare, incorporating features that would make the Carthaginian navy the most formidable maritime force of its era. The political organization of early Carthage evolved from monarchical rule under leaders like Elissa to an oligarchic republic that balanced various interests within the city's elite. The transition was gradual and largely peaceful, reflecting the Carthaginian preference for negotiation and compromise over violent revolution. By the 6th century, Carthage was governed by a complex system that included elected magistrates, called suffets, a powerful council of elders, and a popular assembly that, while limited in its powers, provided some voice for the broader citizenry. This political system, which Aristotle would later praise for its stability and effectiveness, emerged from the need to balance competing interests within Carthaginian society. The old Phoenician aristocracy, the newly wealthy merchant families, the military leadership, and the broader population all required representation and consideration. The resulting constitution, unwritten but understood and respected, created a framework for governance that would endure for over 6 centuries, adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining fundamental continuity. The social structure of early Carthage reflected both its Phoenician heritage and its unique colonial circumstances. At the apex stood the aristocratic families who traced their lineage back to the original colonists from Tyre. Below them, a growing merchant class accumulated wealth through trade and industry, gradually challenging aristocratic preeminence. Skilled artisans and small traders formed a middle stratum, while agricultural workers, both free and enslaved, constituted the largest portion of the population. This hierarchy, while rigid in some respects, allowed for more social mobility than many ancient societies, particularly through commercial success. Women in early Carthaginian society enjoyed greater freedom and influence than their counterparts in many contemporary civilizations. The founding legend of Queen Elissa established a precedent for female authority and capability. While excluded from formal political office, aristocratic women could own property, engage in business transactions, and exercise considerable influence through their families and religious roles. The goddess Tanit's prominence in Carthaginian religion may have reinforced the respect accorded to women, though we must be careful not to overstate their equality in what remained a fundamentally patriarchal society. Education in early Carthage focused on practical skills necessary for commercial and administrative success. Literacy in the Phoenician alphabet was widespread among the upper and middle classes, essential for maintaining the complex records required by long-distance trade. Mathematical knowledge, particularly in accounting and navigation, was highly valued. Young men from elite families often travelled to other Phoenician cities or Greek settlements to broaden their education, bringing back new ideas and techniques that enriched Carthaginian culture. The military organisation of early Carthage differed significantly from the system that would later become famous during the Punic Wars. Initially, citizen militias defended the city and its immediate territory, following the common ancient pattern of farmer soldiers who took up arms when necessary. Naval service, requiring specialised skills, drew from the maritime population and included many professional sailors and marines. As Carthaginian interests expanded, the limitations of this system became apparent, leading to increasing reliance on mercenary forces that would become a defining characteristic of Carthaginian warfare. Cultural life in early Carthage blended Phoenician traditions with influences from across the Mediterranean world. Music and dance, though leaving little archaeological trace, played important roles in religious ceremonies and social gatherings. Literary works written on perishable papyrus have almost entirely vanished, though references in ancient sources suggest a rich tradition of historical chronicles, religious texts, and technical manuals. The visual arts, better preserved, show a sophisticated aesthetic that combined Eastern Mediterranean traditions with local innovations and borrowed Greek techniques. The relationship between Carthage and the Greek world during this early period was complex and multifaceted. Greek colonization of Sicily and southern Italy brought these two expanding civilizations into contact and occasional conflict. Yet the relationship was not purely antagonistic. Carthaginian and Greek merchants traded extensively, and cultural exchange flowed in both directions. Carthaginian aristocrats adopted certain Greek customs and artistic styles, while Greek writers showed fascination with Carthaginian wealth and power, even as they disparaged Phoenician culture as barbarous and materialistic. The rise of a maritime empire. The transformation of Carthage from a prosperous trading city into the dominant power of the Western Mediterranean occurred through a combination of deliberate expansion, opportunistic intervention, and responses to external threats. By the 6th century before the Common Era, Carthage had emerged from Tyre's shadow to assume leadership over the Phoenician settlements scattered across North Africa, Spain, Sardinia, and Sicily. This process of empire building was neither linear nor inevitable, but rather the product of centuries of patient construction, strategic vision, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. The expansion across North Africa represented Carthage's first and most fundamental imperial project. Moving westward along the coast, Carthaginian influence spread through a combination of colonization, alliance building, and gradual absorption of existing Phoenician settlements. Cities like Hadrumetum, Leptis Minor, and Hippodioritis became integral parts of the Carthaginian sphere, maintaining local autonomy while acknowledging Carthaginian leadership in matters of defence and foreign policy. This expansion was not merely coastal. Carthaginian control extended inland, encompassing fertile agricultural territories that would become the economic backbone of the empire. The indigenous Libyan peoples responded to Carthaginian expansion in various ways. Some groups resisted, leading to conflicts that tested Carthaginian military capabilities and diplomatic skills. Others saw advantages in cooperation, gaining access to Mediterranean trade networks and protection from rival tribes. The Carthaginians, displaying a pragmatism that would characterize their imperial administration, adapted their approach to local circumstances. Where possible, they ruled through existing tribal structures, demanding tribute and military service while allowing considerable internal autonomy. This flexible approach to imperial governance would become a hallmark of Carthaginian administration. The development of the Carthaginian navy represented perhaps the most crucial factor in the city's rise to imperial status. Building upon Phoenician maritime traditions, Carthaginian shipbuilders and naval tacticians created a force capable of projecting power throughout the western Mediterranean. The evolution of Carthaginian naval technology proceeded through several stages, each responding to new challenges and opportunities. Early vessels, primarily designed for trade, gradually gave way to specialized warships that could both protect commercial shipping and engage enemy fleets in battle. The quincunareme, a vessel with 5 banks of oars, became the backbone of the Carthaginian fleet by the 4th century. These formidable ships, measuring over 40 metres in length and carrying crews of 300 men, combined speed, manoeuvrability, and striking power. Carthaginian naval architects made numerous innovations to the basic design, including reinforced rams for breaking enemy hulls, elevated fighting platforms for marines, and improved sail configurations that allowed for greater speed under favourable winds. The construction of these vessels required enormous resources and specialised knowledge, advantages that Carthage possessed in abundance. Naval bases established throughout the Carthaginian sphere of influence extended the reach and effectiveness of the fleet. These installations, ranging from simple anchorages with basic repair facilities to elaborate port complexes with shipyards, arsenals, and barracks, created a network that allowed Carthaginian naval forces to operate far from home waters for extended periods. The strategic placement of these bases reflected sophisticated understanding of maritime geography, seasonal wind patterns, and the requirements of naval logistics. The human element of Carthaginian naval power deserves particular attention. Unlike many ancient states that relied on conscripted rowers, Carthage employed professional crews whose skills were honed through constant practice and regular service. Naval commanders drawn from the Carthaginian aristocracy underwent extensive training in navigation, tactics, and fleet management. The Marines who fought from Carthaginian warships represented elite forces, equipped with the finest weapons and armour the empire could provide. This professionalisation of naval service gave Carthage significant advantages over adversaries who relied on hastily assembled fleets manned by inexperienced crews. Colonial foundations across the Mediterranean extended Carthaginian power and influence far beyond North Africa. These settlements served multiple purposes: commercial outposts for trade, strategic bases for military operations, agricultural colonies for food production, and centres for resource extraction. Each colony was established with careful consideration of its potential contributions to the broader Carthaginian imperial system. The process of colonization itself followed established patterns, with initial exploration, followed by negotiation with local peoples, formal foundation ceremonies, and the gradual development of urban infrastructure. In Sicily, Carthaginian colonization concentrated in the western portion of the island, where cities like Panormus, Soluntum, and Mottia became major centres of Carthaginian power. These Sicilian possessions proved particularly valuable, providing grain for the growing population of Carthage and serving as forward bases for commercial and military operations in the central Mediterranean. The relationship between these colonies and the indigenous Sicilian peoples varied considerably, ranging from peaceful coexistence and cultural exchange to periodic conflicts over territory and resources. Sardinia presented different opportunities and challenges for Carthaginian imperialism. The island's mountainous interior remained largely independent, controlled by the indigenous Nuragic peoples who fiercely resisted outside domination. Carthaginian control concentrated on the coastal plains and mining districts, where rich deposits of silver, lead, and other minerals provided valuable resources for the empire. The Carthaginians established fortified settlements at strategic points, creating a network of strongholds that could support each other against indigenous resistance or external threats. The Balearic Islands became another important component of the Carthaginian Empire, valued particularly for the military skills of their inhabitants. The famous Balearic slingers, whose accuracy with their simple weapons was legendary throughout the ancient world, served as mercenaries in Carthaginian armies for centuries. The islands also provided harbours for Carthaginian vessels operating in the western Mediterranean, and served as bases for anti-piracy operations that protected commercial shipping. Spanish colonization represented one of Carthage's most ambitious and ultimately successful imperial ventures. The Phoenicians had established trading posts along the Spanish coast centuries earlier, but Carthaginian involvement transformed these scattered settlements into an integrated colonial system. The wealth of Spain, its silver mines, agricultural production, and hardy population made it an increasingly important part of the Carthaginian Empire. Cities like Gades, Malacca, and Sexy became major centres of Carthaginian influence, while new foundations like Carthago Nova would later serve as power bases for the Barcid family's virtual kingdom within the empire. The establishment of trade networks represented the lifeblood of Carthaginian imperialism. These networks, extending from Britain to the Levant and from the Baltic to sub-Saharan Africa, created flows of goods, information, and cultural influence that bound the Mediterranean world together. Carthaginian merchants, operating under the protection of the empire's naval power, developed sophisticated commercial practices that included standardized weights and measures, complex credit instruments, and international commercial law. The trans-Saharan trade routes, though less well documented than maritime commerce, contributed significantly to Carthaginian wealth and power. Caravans crossing the desert brought gold, ivory, precious stones, and enslaved peoples from the African interior. The Carthaginians established relationships with the Garamantes and other Saharan peoples who controlled key oases and knew the secret paths through the desert. This trade required substantial organization and investment, with the establishment of supply depots, the breeding of camels adapted to desert conditions, and the development of navigation techniques for crossing vast expanses of sand. Atlantic exploration pushed the boundaries of Carthaginian knowledge and commercial reach. The famous voyages of Hanno the Navigator, who led an expedition down the West African coast, perhaps as far as modern Cameroon, demonstrated Carthaginian ambitions to explore and exploit regions beyond the traditional Mediterranean world. These expeditions, while not leading to permanent colonization, established trading relationships with African peoples and brought back valuable information about distant lands and their resources. The northern trade routes, reaching through Gaul to Britain and possibly beyond, brought tin, amber, furs, and other northern products to Mediterranean markets. Carthaginian traders, either directly or through intermediaries, participated in commercial networks that connected the Mediterranean with Central and Northern Europe. The complexity of these arrangements, involving multiple languages, currencies, and legal systems, showcased the sophisticated commercial capabilities that underpinned Carthaginian imperial power. Diplomatic relations with other powers played a crucial role in Carthaginian imperial expansion. The empire's leaders understood that military force alone could not sustain their far-flung dominions. Successful imperialism required careful diplomacy, strategic alliances, and the ability to balance competing interests. Treaties with Rome, before the cities became mortal enemies, delineated spheres of influence and regulated commercial relationships. Agreements with Greek cities in Sicily maintained uneasy truces that allowed both sides to pursue their interests without constant warfare. The relationship with Egypt under the Ptolemaic dynasty exemplified Carthaginian diplomatic sophistication. Both powers shared interests in maintaining profitable trade routes and containing the expansion of rival powers. Carthaginian embassies to Alexandria negotiated commercial agreements, exchanged intelligence about common threats, and occasionally coordinated military activities. These diplomatic relationships required skilled negotiators who understood not only the languages and customs of foreign courts, but also the complex interplay of interests that shaped international relations. The administration of the Carthaginian Empire evolved to meet the challenges of governing diverse territories and peoples. Unlike the Roman model of direct rule and cultural assimilation, Carthaginian imperialism generally preserved local institutions and customs while ensuring imperial interests were protected. This administrative flexibility allowed Carthage to govern its empire with relatively small numbers of officials and soldiers, relying instead on local elites who had been co-opted into the imperial system. Provincial governors, appointed by the Carthaginian government, exercised supreme authority in their territories, but were expected to work through existing power structures where possible. These governors, usually drawn from the Carthaginian aristocracy, combined civil and military authority, responsible for collecting tribute, maintaining order, and defending their provinces against external threats. The potential for abuse in this system was recognized, and various mechanisms existed to check gubernatorial power, including regular rotation of appointments and the requirement to submit accounts to authorities in Carthage. The tribute system that financed the Carthaginian Empire varied considerably across different territories. Some regions paid fixed annual amounts in silver or gold, while others provided specific products or services. Sicily contributed grain, Sardinia provided minerals and agricultural products, Spain supplied silver and military manpower. The flexibility of these arrangements reflected Carthaginian pragmatism and their understanding that excessive demands could provoke rebellion or economic collapse. Military organization within the empire combined various elements to create effective fighting forces. The Carthaginian citizen militia, while never entirely abandoned, played an increasingly minor role as the empire expanded. Instead, the imperial military relied heavily on mercenary forces drawn from throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. Libyan infantry, Numidian cavalry, Balearic slingers, Gallic warriors, and Iberian swordsmen all served under Carthaginian standards, creating armies of remarkable diversity but also considerable complexity. The use of mercenaries, while providing military flexibility and preserving Carthaginian citizen lives, created its own challenges. Mercenary forces required regular payment, and delays could lead to mutinies or defections. The loyalty of mercenary commanders was always uncertain, particularly when facing enemies who might offer better terms. The Carthaginians developed various strategies to manage these risks, including the use of mixed units that prevented any single ethnic group from dominating, the holding of hostages to ensure loyalty, and the careful cultivation of relationships with mercenary leaders. The war elephant, perhaps the most famous symbol of Carthaginian military power, represented both the empire's reach and its innovative approach to warfare. These magnificent creatures, primarily African forest elephants, smaller than their Indian cousins, were captured and trained in special facilities established in North Africa. The logistics of maintaining elephant corps, providing food, medical care, and specialized training demanded substantial resources and expertise. Yet the psychological impact of elephants on enemies unfamiliar with them, combined with their effectiveness in breaking infantry formations, made them valuable additions to Carthaginian armies. Cultural and religious policies within the Carthaginian Empire generally displayed tolerance for local traditions, while promoting certain universal elements that bound the empire together. The worship of Carthaginian deities, particularly Baal, Hammon and Tanit, spread throughout the empire, often syncretized with local gods. Yet there was no systematic attempt to suppress indigenous religions or impose Carthaginian beliefs on subject peoples. This religious tolerance, pragmatic rather than principled, helped maintain stability in diverse territories. The spread of Carthaginian language and writing systems facilitated administration and commerce throughout the empire. Punic, the Carthaginian dialect of Phoenician, became a lingua franca in many regions, used for official documents, commercial contracts, and international correspondence. The Phoenician alphabet, adapted to local languages, spread literacy and facilitated communication across linguistic boundaries. Yet here too, the Carthaginians showed flexibility, with official documents often produced in multiple languages to ensure understanding by all parties. Urban planning and architecture in Carthaginian colonies reflected both metropolitan models and local adaptations. New cities were typically laid out with regular street grids, public spaces for markets and assemblies, and designated areas for temples, administrative buildings, and residential quarters. Fortifications, essential for defence in an often hostile world, followed sophisticated designs that incorporated the latest developments in siege warfare. Harbour facilities, crucial for maintaining maritime connections with Carthage, received particular attention, with elaborate quays, warehouses and shipyards constructed in major ports. The economic integration of the empire created interdependencies that strengthened imperial cohesion while generating tremendous wealth. Regional specialization developed, with different territories focusing on products for which they had comparative advantages. This economic integration was facilitated by standardized weights and measures, common commercial practices, and the security provided by Carthaginian naval power. The result was an early form of a common market that prefigured later economic unions in the Mediterranean world. Agricultural development throughout the empire reflected Carthaginian expertise in farming and estate management. The agricultural manual of Margo, which Roman authors considered the definitive work on farming, codified centuries of accumulated knowledge about crop selection, soil management, irrigation, and animal husbandry. Carthaginian agricultural techniques, spread through the empire by colonists and agricultural advisors, improved productivity and introduced new crops to different regions. The development of large estates worked by slave labour, particularly in North Africa, created agricultural surpluses that supported urban populations and generated export revenues. Industrial production in the Carthaginian Empire achieved scales and sophistication unprecedented in the Western Mediterranean. Metalworking centres in Spain and Sardinia produced tools, weapons, and luxury goods for markets throughout the empire and beyond. Textile production, concentrated in North Africa and certain Sicilian cities, created products ranging from rough cloth for common use to fine fabrics that competed with Eastern luxury goods. The purple dye industry, jealously guarded as a state monopoly, generated enormous profits from the tiny quantities of dye extracted from countless murex shellfish. The circulation of coinage throughout the Carthaginian Empire facilitated commerce and helped integrate diverse economies. Carthaginian coins, bearing images of Tanit, horses, palm trees, and other symbols of the empire, became accepted currency throughout the Western Mediterranean. The maintenance of consistent weight and purity standards built confidence in Carthaginian coinage, making it preferred for international transactions. Local mints in various colonies produced coins following Carthaginian standards, creating a monetary union that simplified trade and tribute collection. Carthaginian society and culture. Within the massive walls that protected Carthage from its enemies, a complex and sophisticated society flourished for over 6 centuries, developing distinctive customs, beliefs, and social structures that set it apart from contemporary civilizations. The Carthaginian social order, while sharing certain features with other ancient Mediterranean societies, evolved unique characteristics shaped by its Phoenician heritage, African setting, and commercial orientation. Understanding this society requires examining not just its formal structures, but also the daily experiences of its inhabitants, from the wealthiest merchants to the humblest labourers. The social hierarchy of Carthage was both rigid and fluid, maintaining clear distinctions between classes while allowing for mobility through commercial success and military achievement. At the apex of society stood the aristocratic families who traced their lineage to the original colonists from Tyre or to other ancient Phoenician settlements. These families, whose names appear repeatedly in historical records, the Magonids, the Barkids, the Hannos, controlled vast wealth derived from land ownership, commercial ventures, and hereditary privileges. Their elaborate genealogies, carefully preserved and publicly displayed, legitimized their claims to power and distinguished them from newer wealth. Below the ancient aristocracy, a broader elite class had emerged by the 5th century, composed of successful merchants, military commanders, and administrative officials who had accumulated sufficient wealth to participate in public life. These individuals, while lacking the pristine bloodlines of the old families, possessed the resources necessary to fund military expeditions, construct public buildings, and maintain the clientage networks essential for political influence. The tensions between old aristocracy and new wealth created political dynamics that shaped Carthaginian history, with different factions competing for power through the city's complex governmental institutions. The middle classes of Carthage encompassed a diverse array of occupations and economic levels. Skilled artisans, metalworkers, jewelers, pottery makers, weavers formed professional associations that protected their interests and maintained quality standards. Small-scale merchants operated shops in the city's numerous markets, selling everything from daily necessities to imported luxuries. Scribes and accountants, essential for maintaining the complex records required by international commerce, enjoyed steady employment and social respect. Ship captains and navigators, whose skills were crucial for Carthage's maritime dominance, occupied a special position, respected for their expertise and often accumulating considerable wealth through trading ventures. The lower classes of free citizens included dock workers, construction labourers, agricultural workers, and domestic servants who performed the manual labour essential for urban life. These individuals, while possessing legal rights and protections denied to slaves, lived precarious existences, vulnerable to economic downturns and dependent on wealthy patrons for security. The Carthaginian practice of distributing grain to poor citizens during times of scarcity suggests recognition of the need to maintain social stability through welfare provisions, though the extent and regularity of such distributions remains unclear. Slavery played a fundamental role in Carthaginian society, as in all ancient Mediterranean civilizations. Enslaved peoples, acquired through warfare, piracy, trade, and debt bondage, performed much of the agricultural and industrial labour that sustained the empire's economy. The conditions of slavery varied enormously, depending on the skills and circumstances of individual slaves. Agricultural slaves on North African estates endured harsh conditions and had little hope of freedom, while skilled urban slaves might accumulate property and eventually purchase their liberty. Household slaves in wealthy families sometimes developed close relationships with their masters, receiving education and eventually manumission as rewards for loyal service. The legal status of different population groups within Carthaginian territory created a complex hierarchy of rights and obligations. Full citizens of Carthage enjoyed political participation, legal protections, and economic privileges denied to other groups. Libya Phoenicians, descendants of intermarriage between Phoenician colonists and indigenous peoples, occupied an intermediate position, possessing some rights but excluded from the highest offices. Indigenous peoples, under Carthaginian rule, retained their own legal systems for internal matters, but were subject to Carthaginian authority in cases involving imperial interests. Religious life permeated every aspect of Carthaginian society, from state ceremonies to private devotions. The pantheon of deities worshipped in Carthage reflected the city's Phoenician origins, while incorporating influences from Africa, Greece, and other cultures encountered through trade and conquest. Baal-Hamon, the chief male deity, presided over fertility, weather, and warfare, receiving elaborate sacrifices and commanding widespread devotion. His consort Tanit, whose symbol of a triangle topped by a disc and crescent became ubiquitous throughout Carthaginian territory, evolved from a subordinate position to become perhaps the most important deity in later Carthaginian religion. The controversial practice of child sacrifice, mentioned by numerous ancient sources and seemingly confirmed by archaeological evidence from the Tophet sanctuaries, remains one of the most debated aspects of Carthaginian religion. The interpretation of infant burials found in these sacred precincts continues to divide scholars, with some arguing for regular sacrifice of living children, and others suggesting these were cemetery areas for children who died naturally. The ancient sources, mostly written by Carthage's enemies, describe elaborate ceremonies in which children, particularly during times of crisis, were offered to Baal-Hamon and Tanit to secure divine favour. Modern archaeological evidence shows cremated remains of very young children, often accompanied by sacrificial animals, in numbers that suggest something beyond normal infant mortality. Whatever the exact nature of these practices, they clearly held profound religious significance for the Carthaginians, representing the ultimate offering to their gods. Beyond the controversial Tophet rituals, Carthaginian religious practice encompassed a rich variety of ceremonies, festivals, and personal devotions. The annual festival of Mel carts, inherited from Phoenician tradition, involved the symbolic death and resurrection of the god, celebrated with processions, sacrifices, and public feasting. Priests and priestesses, drawn from aristocratic families, maintained the temples, performed daily rituals, and interpreted divine will through various forms of divination. Sacred prostitution, mentioned by some ancient sources, may have been practiced in certain temples, though the evidence remains ambiguous and controversial. The temples themselves represented significant architectural achievements and centres of economic power. The great temple of Eshmun on the Byrsa hill dominated the city's skyline, its massive columns and elaborate decorations proclaiming Carthaginian wealth and piety. These religious complexes owned extensive lands, maintained their own workshops and warehouses, and employed hundreds of personnel. Temple treasuries served as banks, lending money for commercial ventures and storing valuable deposits for wealthy citizens. The economic role of temples extended to international trade, with temple agents conducting business throughout the Mediterranean under divine protection. Daily life in Carthage revolved around the rhythms of commerce, craftsmanship, and domestic activities. The city awakened before dawn, as merchants prepared their stalls, artisans fired their furnaces, and dock workers began loading and unloading the ships that crowded the harbours. The streets filled with a cacophony of languages, Punic, Greek, Latin, Libyan, and dozens of others, as traders haggled over prices and sailors sought employment for upcoming voyages. The markets offered products from across the known world: British tin, Baltic amber, African ivory, Spanish silver, Greek pottery, Egyptian papyrus, and Syrian glass. Carthaginian houses, excavated by archaeologists, reveal comfortable living conditions for the middle and upper classes. Multi-storey buildings in the crowded urban centre maximised limited space, with shops on the ground floor and residential quarters above. Wealthy homes featured central courtyards, surrounded by rooms for different purposes, with sophisticated systems for water supply and drainage. Decorative elements included colourful wall paintings, mosaic floors depicting geometric patterns or mythological scenes, and imported marble fixtures. Gardens, highly valued in the dense urban environment, provided fresh produce and pleasant spaces for relaxation. The Carthaginian diet reflected both Mediterranean traditions and the city's extensive trade connections. Grain, primarily wheat and barley, formed the dietary staple, consumed as bread, porridge, and beer. Olive oil, produced in vast quantities on North African estates, served for cooking, lighting, and personal hygiene. Wine, both locally produced and imported from famous vineyards, accompanied meals and featured in religious ceremonies. Fish and seafood, abundant in local waters, provided protein for all social classes, while meat from cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs was consumed primarily by the wealthy. Exotic foods imported through Carthage's trade networks, spices from India, silphium from Cyrenaica, garum from Spain, added variety to elite dining. Clothing in Carthage combined Phoenician traditions with influences from across the Mediterranean. The basic garment for both sexes was a tunic, varying in length, material, and decoration according to social status and occasion. Wealthy citizens wore fine linen or silk tunics dyed with precious purple, while common people made do with rough wool or linen in natural colours. Over the tunic, men might wear a cloak for warmth or formality, while women added various outer garments, including veils for modesty. Jewellery, abundant in archaeological finds, ranged from simple bronze pins to elaborate gold necklaces, demonstrating both Carthaginian craftsmanship and the importance of personal adornment. Education in Carthage prepared young people for their roles in a commercial society while transmitting cultural values and traditions. Boys from wealthy families studied reading, writing, and arithmetic with private tutors or in small schools, learning the Punic script and basic mathematical skills essential for commerce. Advanced education might include rhetoric, philosophy, and literature, often requiring study abroad in Greek cities or Alexandria. Girls received more limited formal education, focusing on domestic skills, though evidence suggests that elite women were often literate and some engaged in business activities. The Carthaginian approach to childhood and family structure reflected both universal human patterns and specific cultural values. Families were generally patriarchal, with fathers exercising authority over wives, children, and household slaves. Yet women in Carthage enjoyed greater freedom and legal rights than in many ancient societies, able to own property, conduct business, and initiate divorce under certain circumstances. Children were valued and protected, with various religious and legal provisions for orphans and abandoned infants. The practice of adoption was common, allowing childless couples to secure heirs and providing homes for children without families. Marriage customs in Carthage combined religious ceremony with legal contract, creating bonds that were both sacred and practical. Marriages among the elite were often arranged to cement political alliances or combine commercial enterprises, though evidence suggests that affection and compatibility were also considered. Wedding ceremonies involved elaborate rituals, including sacrifices to ensure divine blessing, processions through the city streets, and feasting that might continue for days. Divorce, while not encouraged, was possible under certain circumstances, with provisions for the return of dowries and support for children. The treatment of illness and injury in Carthage combined religious healing with practical medicine. Temples served as healing centres where priests performed rituals and prescribed treatments believed to have divine sanction. Yet Carthaginian medicine also incorporated empirical knowledge, accumulated through centuries of observation and experimentation. Surgical instruments found in archaeological excavations demonstrate sophisticated understanding of anatomy and surgical techniques. Carthaginian physicians, influenced by Greek medical traditions, while maintaining their own practices, treated everything from battlefield wounds to complicated pregnancies. Entertainment and leisure activities provided relief from the demands of daily life. The theatre, introduced through Greek influence, became popular among the educated classes, with performances of both Greek classics and local productions. Athletic competitions, though never reaching the importance they held in Greek culture, attracted participants and spectators. Board games, dice, and various forms of gambling provided amusement in homes and taverns. Music and dance, essential elements of religious ceremonies, also featured in private celebrations and public festivals. The Carthaginian legal system, though poorly documented compared to Roman law, appears to have been sophisticated and comprehensive. Laws covered commercial transactions, property rights, family matters, and criminal offences, with different courts handling different types of cases. Judges, selected from the aristocracy, were expected to possess both legal knowledge and moral authority. The use of written contracts for commercial transactions, marriage agreements, and property transfers suggests a highly developed legal culture. Punishments for crimes ranged from fines for minor offences to execution for serious crimes, with imprisonment rarely used except for holding accused persons awaiting trial. Art and artistic production in Carthage reflected the city's position at the crossroads of different cultural traditions. Carthaginian artists worked in various media: stone, metal, clay, glass and textiles, creating objects that ranged from utilitarian items to elaborate luxury goods. The distinctive Carthaginian artistic style combined Phoenician traditions with Egyptian, Greek, and indigenous African influences, producing unique hybrid forms. Carved stone stelae, thousands of which have been discovered, display an evolution of artistic styles and religious iconography over centuries. Metalworking represented one of the highest achievements of Carthaginian craftsmanship. Gold and silver jewellery, decorated with granulation and filigree techniques inherited from Phoenician tradition, achieved remarkable delicacy and sophistication. Bronze sculptures, from small votive figurines to life-size statues, demonstrated mastery of casting techniques. Iron weapons and tools, essential for military and economic activities, were produced in quantities that required industrial-scale organization. The decoration of metal objects with engraved or raposi designs created unique artistic works that were valued throughout the Mediterranean. Pottery production in Carthage ranged from mass-produced utilitarian vessels to fine decorated wares that competed with Greek imports. The development of distinctive Carthaginian ceramic styles, particularly in the production of masks and figurines, shows artistic independence from Greek models. Large ceramic workshops employed dozens of workers with specialized roles for different stages of production. The distribution of Carthaginian pottery throughout the Western Mediterranean provides archaeological evidence for trade networks and cultural influence. Glass production, another technology inherited from Phoenician tradition, achieved high levels of sophistication in Carthage. Core-formed vessels, created by winding molten glass around a clay core, produced delicate perfume bottles and other luxury items. Glass beads, manufactured in enormous quantities, served as trade goods particularly valued in exchanges with African peoples. The development of glass-blowing technique, though perhaps occurring after Carthage's destruction, built upon earlier Carthaginian innovations in glass technology. Architecture in Carthage, though largely destroyed by later construction, can be partially reconstructed through archaeological evidence and ancient descriptions. Public buildings combined massive scale with sophisticated engineering, incorporating techniques learned from Greek and Egyptian models while developing distinctive Carthaginian features. The use of opus africanum, a construction technique alternating vertical stone pillars with horizontal courses of smaller stones or rubble, became characteristic of Carthaginian architecture. Multi-story buildings, necessary in the crowded urban environment, required advanced engineering to ensure stability. The famous harbours of Carthage, described by ancient authors and partially excavated by archaeologists, represented one of the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world. The commercial harbour, rectangular in shape, could accommodate over 200 merchant vessels, with quays equipped with warehouses and loading equipment. The military harbour, circular with an island in the centre containing the admiral's headquarters, had covered ship sheds that could house over 200 warships. The entire complex was connected to the sea by a channel that could be closed with chains during attacks, while an elaborate system of walls and towers provided defence. Urban planning in Carthage evolved over centuries from organic growth to deliberate design. The Byrsa Hill, site of the original settlement, remained the religious and administrative centre, crowned with temples and public buildings. Residential quarters spread down the slopes and across the coastal plain, with different neighbourhoods developing distinct characters. The Megara suburb contained elaborate villas with gardens and agricultural plots, providing rural amenities within reach of the city. The industrial quarters, located near the harbours and on the city's periphery, concentrated production facilities that might create noise, smoke, or unpleasant odours. Water supply and sanitation in Carthage achieved levels of sophistication that would not be surpassed until modern times. Aqueducts brought fresh water from distant springs, with covered channels preventing contamination. Cisterns, both public and private, stored rainwater for use during dry periods. Public fountains provided water for those without private supplies, becoming social centres where people gathered to exchange news and gossip. Drainage systems carried wastewater and sewage away from inhabited areas, with some evidence suggesting the existence of public latrines similar to those in Roman cities. The intellectual life of Carthage, though poorly preserved due to the destruction of Carthaginian literature, clearly reached high levels of achievement. The agricultural manual of Mago, praised by Roman authors as the definitive work on farming, represented just one example of Carthaginian technical literature. Historical chronicles, mentioned by ancient sources but now lost, recorded the city's history and achievements. Religious texts, philosophical works, and literary compositions in various genres must have existed, though only fragments and references survive. The Library of Carthage, looted and dispersed after the city's destruction, contained scrolls that Roman nobles considered valuable enough to translate and preserve. Mathematical and astronomical knowledge in Carthage, essential for navigation and commerce, achieved considerable sophistication. Carthaginian navigators used celestial observations to determine position and direction, developing techniques that allowed them to sail beyond sight of land for extended periods. The calculation of interest, exchange rates, and complex commercial transactions required advanced mathematical skills. The Carthaginian calendar, based on lunar months with periodic adjustments to match the solar year, regulated religious festivals and agricultural activities. The economic powerhouse. The extraordinary wealth that allowed Carthage to challenge Rome for Mediterranean supremacy arose from an economic system of unprecedented sophistication and scale. Carthaginian prosperity rested upon multiple foundations: agriculture that maximized the potential of North African soil, industries that transformed raw materials into valuable products, and above all, trade networks that connected diverse economies across 3 continents. This economic power, carefully cultivated over centuries, created the resources necessary for empire building while shaping every aspect of Carthaginian society and culture. The agricultural sector of the Carthaginian economy began with the fertile lands surrounding the city itself, but eventually encompassed vast territories across North Africa. The Cape Bon Peninsula, jutting into the Mediterranean east of Carthage, became an agricultural paradise under Carthaginian management. Here, careful irrigation, crop rotation, and intensive cultivation produced yields that amazed ancient observers. The Carthaginians transformed semi-arid lands into productive farms through sophisticated water management techniques, including the construction of cisterns, channels, and retention basins that captured and preserved seasonal rainfall. The estate system that developed in Carthaginian territory represented an early form of industrial agriculture. Large properties owned by wealthy Carthaginians and worked primarily by slave labour specialised in producing specific crops for export markets. These estates achieved economies of scale impossible for small farmers, investing in equipment, storage facilities, and processing installations that maximised productivity and profit. The famous Manual of Mago, which Roman senators considered so valuable they ordered it translated into Latin after Carthage's destruction, codified centuries of accumulated agricultural knowledge into systematic principles of farm management. Grain production formed the foundation of Carthaginian agriculture, with wheat and barley cultivated across vast expanses of North African territory. The Carthaginians developed drought-resistant varieties suited to local conditions, selected through generations of careful observation and experimentation. Ploughing techniques, adapted to different soil types and moisture conditions, maximized yields while preventing erosion. Harvesting, threshing, and storage methods evolved to handle large quantities of grain efficiently, with massive granaries constructed to store surpluses for export or emergency use. The cultivation of olive trees transformed the North African landscape and economy. Carthaginian farmers planted millions of olive trees, creating groves that stretched for kilometres across the countryside. These trees, requiring years to mature, but then productive for centuries, represented long-term investments that only a stable, prosperous society could undertake. The Carthaginians developed techniques for grafting, pruning, and cultivation that improved both yield and oil quality. Olive presses, ranging from simple lever devices to complex mechanical installations, extracted oil that was graded, stored, and shipped throughout the Mediterranean world. Viticulture, though less dominant than in some Mediterranean regions, contributed significantly to Carthaginian agricultural production. Vineyards established on hillsides and specially prepared terraces produced wines that, while perhaps not matching the finest Greek vintages, found ready markets throughout the empire. The Carthaginians developed techniques for preserving and transporting wine, including the use of resin-lined amphorae and additives that prevented spoilage during long sea voyages. The production of raisins and other preserved grape products added value and extended the marketing season for vineyard production. Fruit and vegetable cultivation supplied both local consumption and export markets. Pomegranates, known to the Romans as Punic apples, became particularly associated with Carthaginian agriculture. Figs, dates, almonds, and other tree crops provided dietary variety and commercial opportunities. Market gardens near cities produced fresh vegetables, while techniques for drying, pickling, and otherwise preserving produce allowed for long-distance trade. The Carthaginians introduced new crops from different regions of their empire, experimenting with varieties and cultivation techniques to expand agricultural diversity. Animal husbandry complemented crop production in the Carthaginian agricultural system. Cattle, essential for ploughing and transport, as well as meat and dairy products, were bred for characteristics suited to North African conditions. Sheep and goats, better adapted to marginal lands, provided wool, meat, and dairy products, while requiring less intensive management than cattle. Horse breeding, crucial for military purposes, achieved particular sophistication, with Carthaginian and Numidian horses renowned for their speed and endurance. The raising of elephants for war, though limited in scale, required specialized knowledge and facilities that demonstrated Carthaginian expertise in managing exotic animals. The integration of agriculture with other economic sectors multiplied its value and impact. Agricultural products were processed into higher value goods, olives into oil, grapes into wine, milk into cheese, wool into textiles. Byproducts found uses in other industries, olive pits burned for fuel, grape pomace fed to animals, animal bones processed into glue and other products. This comprehensive utilization of agricultural resources maximized economic returns while minimizing waste. Trade routes and merchant practices formed the circulatory system of the Carthaginian economy, moving goods, information, and capital throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. Carthaginian merchants developed sophisticated techniques for organizing and financing commercial ventures, including partnerships that spread risk, credit instruments that facilitated long-distance trade, and insurance arrangements that protected against losses. The complexity of these commercial practices required detailed record-keeping, standardized procedures, and legal frameworks that could resolve disputes across cultural and linguistic boundaries. Maritime trade dominated Carthaginian commerce, with merchant vessels carrying cargoes throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. The typical Carthaginian merchant ship broader and deeper than warships, could carry hundreds of tons of cargo while requiring relatively small crews. These vessels, built for capacity and seaworthiness rather than speed, incorporated design features that maximized cargo space while maintaining stability in rough seas. The development of specialized ships for different trades, grain haulers with extensive hold capacity, wine ships with racks for amphorae, livestock carriers with ventilation and feeding arrangements, demonstrated adaptation to specific commercial requirements. The organization of maritime trade required extensive infrastructure and support services. Carthaginian ports provided not just anchorage, but comprehensive facilities for loading, unloading, and storing cargo. Warehouses, organized by commodity type and ownership, stored goods awaiting shipment or distribution. Ship chandlers supplied vessels with provisions, equipment, and repair services. Financial institutions provided credit, currency exchange, and payment transfer services. Legal officials recorded contracts, certified weights and measures, and adjudicated commercial disputes. Overland trade routes, though less prominent than maritime commerce, connected Carthage with interior regions of Africa and distant markets beyond the reach of ships. Caravan organization required different skills and resources than maritime trade, including knowledge of routes, water sources, and local political conditions. The Carthaginians established relationships with nomadic peoples who controlled desert routes, paying for protection and guidance while providing markets for desert products. Caravanserais, fortified stopping points with water, food, and security, supported long-distance overland trade. The trans-Saharan trade, though difficult to document precisely, brought sub-Saharan products to Mediterranean markets. Gold from West African sources, carried across the desert by intermediaries, provided crucial monetary resources for the Carthaginian economy. Ivory, more abundant and accessible than in later periods, supplied raw material for artistic and practical objects. Exotic animals, precious stones, and rare woods added to the diversity of African products reaching Carthage. The human traffic in enslaved peoples, morally abhorrent to modern sensibilities but economically significant in antiquity, formed another component of trans-Saharan commerce. Currency and banking systems developed by the Carthaginians facilitated economic transactions throughout their commercial sphere. Carthaginian coinage, introduced relatively late compared to Greek cities, quickly became a preferred medium of exchange in the Western Mediterranean. The maintenance of consistent weight and purity standards built confidence in Carthaginian currency, while the variety of denominations facilitated transactions of different scales. The iconography of Carthaginian coins, featuring tannet, horses, palm trees, and other symbols, proclaimed Carthaginian identity and power while serving practical commercial purposes. Banking services in Carthage ranged from simple money changing to complex international financial operations. Temples served as repositories for valuable deposits, lending their sacred protection to stored wealth. Private bankers, often operating in families or partnerships, provided credit for commercial ventures, accepting deposits, making loans, and transferring funds between distant locations. The development of written instruments, promissory notes, letters of credit, bills of exchange, allowed for financial transactions without the physical transfer of currency, reducing risk and increasing efficiency. The standardization of weights and measures throughout Carthaginian territory facilitated commerce by reducing transaction costs and disputes. The Carthaginian system, based on Eastern Mediterranean standards but adapted to local needs, provided consistent units for measuring everything from grain to precious metals. Official inspectors verified the accuracy of merchant scales and measures with severe penalties for fraud. The adoption of Carthaginian standards by trading partners, whether voluntary or imposed, created a commercial zone with reduced barriers to trade. Industrial production in Carthage achieved scales and sophistication that prefigured later manufacturing developments. The concentration of production in specialized workshops, the division of labor among skilled workers, and the standardization of products for mass markets all appeared in Carthaginian industry centuries before the modern Industrial Revolution. While lacking mechanical power sources, Carthaginian manufacturers compensated through organization, skill, and the intensive use of human and animal labor. Metalworking industries in Carthage processed both local and imported raw materials into products ranging from agricultural tools to military weapons, from household utensils to religious artifacts. The techniques employed, casting, forging, welding, engraving, inlaying, required specialized knowledge transmitted through apprenticeship systems. Different workshops specialized in different metals or products, developing expertise that improved quality and efficiency. The scale of production, particularly for military equipment, required coordination among multiple workshops and careful quality control. The purple dye industry, perhaps Carthage's most famous manufacturing sector, exemplified the combination of technical knowledge, capital investment, and commercial organization that characterized Carthaginian industry. The extraction of purple dye from murex shellfish required enormous quantities of raw material, thousands of shellfish yielding tiny amounts of dye. The process itself, involving careful timing and temperature control, demanded experienced workers and specialized facilities. The resulting product, worth more than gold by weight, colored the garments of royalty and aristocracy throughout the ancient world. Textile production employed thousands of workers in operations ranging from household spinning to large-scale weaving establishments. The processing of raw materials, cleaning and combing wool, retting and spinning flax, preparing silk imported from the East, required different techniques and facilities. Weaving, performed on looms of various sizes and complexity, produced fabrics ranging from coarse sailcloth to fine garments. Dyeing, using purple and other colours derived from vegetables, minerals and animals, added value and variety to textile products. The finishing processes, fulling, pressing, decorating, transformed raw cloth into market-ready products. Glass production in Carthage continued and expanded Phoenician traditions while incorporating new techniques and styles. Core-formed vessels, created by winding molten glass around clay forms, produced delicate containers for perfumes and cosmetics. Cast glass objects, made in moulds, ranged from jewellery elements to architectural decorations. Glass beads manufactured in enormous quantities served both decorative and commercial purposes, particularly in trade with African peoples who valued them highly. The colours achieved by Carthaginian glassmakers, deep blues, emerald greens, amber yellows, resulted from carefully guarded formulas for adding metallic oxides to glass batches. Pottery production, though less prestigious than metalworking or purple dyeing, employed large numbers of workers and supplied essential products for daily life. Carthaginian potters produced everything from simple cooking vessels to elaborate decorated pieces that competed with Greek imports. The development of specialized ceramic products, transport amphorae designed for specific contents, industrial ceramics for metallurgy and other processes, architectural ceramics for construction, demonstrated technical innovation and market responsiveness. Large pottery workshops, with multiple kilns and specialized workers, achieved economies of scale that reduced costs while maintaining quality. Shipbuilding represented one of Carthage's most strategically important industries. combining traditional craftsmanship with continuous innovation. Carthaginian shipyards constructed vessels ranging from small fishing boats to massive warships, each designed for specific purposes and conditions. The selection and preparation of timber, crucial for vessel durability, required extensive knowledge of wood properties and seasoning techniques. The shaping and joining of hull components demanded precise craftsmanship and specialized tools. The integration of various components, sails, rigging, steering mechanisms, anchors, into functional vessels required coordination among different specialists. The construction industries in Carthage supported both urban development and military fortification. Quarrying operations extracted stone from deposits around Carthage and throughout its territory, with different stone selected for different purposes based on hardness, workability, and appearance. Stone cutting and carving, performed by skilled masons, transformed rough blocks into architectural elements and decorative features. The production of construction materials, bricks, tiles, cement, plaster, required specialized facilities and techniques. The organization of large construction projects demanded coordination among various trades and careful project management. The food processing industries added value to agricultural products while extending their shelf life and marketability. Oil pressing establishments, ranging from small family operations to large commercial facilities, extracted olive oil that was filtered, graded, and packaged for different markets. Wine production facilities included not just presses, but also fermentation vats, storage facilities, and bottling operations. Fish processing, particularly the production of garum, fermented fish sauce, and salted fish, created products that could be shipped throughout the Mediterranean. The preservation of meat through salting, smoking, and drying extended its marketability beyond local consumption. The luxury goods sector of the Carthaginian economy, though smaller in volume than bulk commodities, generated disproportionate profits and prestige. Jewellery workshops created elaborate pieces combining precious metals with gems, glass, and enamel. Furniture makers produced items from expensive, imported woods, decorated with ivory, metal, and inlay work. Perfume manufacturers blended exotic ingredients from across the known world, storing their products in specially designed containers that became luxury items themselves. These luxury industries required not just technical skill, but also understanding of fashion and taste in different markets. Early conflicts and Greek wars. The expansion of Carthaginian power throughout the western Mediterranean inevitably brought conflict with other peoples seeking to control the same territories and trade routes. Among these conflicts, the centuries-long struggle with Greek colonies in Sicily and southern Italy proved particularly significant, establishing patterns of warfare, diplomacy, and cultural interaction that would shape the development of the ancient Mediterranean world. These wars, fought intermittently from the 6th to the 3rd centuries before the Common Era, tested Carthaginian military capabilities, diplomatic skills, and imperial resilience, while contributing to the evolution of ancient warfare. The Greek colonization of Sicily and southern Italy, beginning in the 8th century, created a dynamic and often volatile political landscape. Cities like Syracuse, Acragas, Gela, and Selinus developed into powerful independent states, competing with each other while maintaining complex relationships with their mother cities in Greece. These Greek colonies brought advanced military techniques, sophisticated political institutions, and a cultural confidence that often expressed itself in aggressive expansion. The western portion of Sicily, where Carthaginian influence was strongest, became a contested zone where different civilizations met, traded, and fought for supremacy. The earliest conflicts between Carthaginians and Greeks in Sicily arose from commercial competition rather than territorial ambition. Both peoples sought to control trade routes, establish profitable commercial relationships with indigenous peoples, and exclude competitors from lucrative markets. These economic tensions occasionally erupted into violence, with merchant vessels seized, trading posts raided, and commercial agreements violated. Yet for much of the 6th century, Carthaginians and Greeks managed to coexist in Sicily, with spheres of influence that, while sometimes overlapping, generally allowed both communities to prosper. The transformation from commercial rivalry to military conflict occurred gradually, driven by the ambitions of individual leaders and the dynamics of interstate competition. The rise of tyrants in Greek Sicilian cities, rulers who gained power through force and maintained it through military success, created more aggressive and expansionist policies. These tyrants, needing military victories to legitimize their rule and resources to reward their supporters, looked to Carthaginian territories as targets for expansion. Simultaneously, Carthaginian imperial consolidation required defending existing possessions and potentially expanding to prevent Greek encirclement of Carthaginian positions. The first major Carthaginian military expedition to Sicily, traditionally dated to around 550 before the Common Era, responded to appeals from Selinus and other cities threatened by Greek expansion. This expedition, though poorly documented, appears to have achieved limited success in restraining Greek aggression without fundamentally altering the balance of power. The Carthaginians learned valuable lessons about the challenges of operating large armies far from home, the importance of local allies, and the effectiveness of Greek military tactics that would influence future campaigns. The Battle of Himera in 480 before the Common Era marked a defining moment in Carthaginian-Greek relations. Hamilcar the Magonid led an enormous Carthaginian army, reportedly numbering 300,000 men, though certainly much smaller in reality, in an ambitious attempt to conquer Greek Sicily. The expedition represented unprecedented Carthaginian military commitment, with forces drawn from throughout the empire, including Libyans, Iberians, Sardinians, and Corsicans. The diversity of this army, while demonstrating Carthaginian imperial reach, also created challenges of coordination, communication, and command that would prove fatal. The Greek forces, led by Gelon of Syracuse and Theron of Acragas, employed superior tactical coordination and knowledge of local terrain to defeat the Carthaginian army decisively. Hamilcar died in the battle, either killed in combat or, according to some sources, throwing himself into a sacrificial fire when defeat became inevitable. The destruction of the Carthaginian army and fleet at Himera represented a catastrophic setback that would influence Carthaginian policy towards Sicily for generations. The psychological impact of the defeat, occurring simultaneously with the Persian defeats at Salamis and Plataea, reinforced Greek cultural confidence and the perception of superiority over barbarian peoples. The aftermath of Himera forced Carthage to reassess its approach to Sicilian affairs. For several decades, the Carthaginians avoided major military interventions, focusing instead on consolidating their existing possessions and rebuilding military capabilities. This period of retrenchment allowed for economic recovery and the development of new military techniques and technologies. The Carthaginians studied Greek warfare, recruiting Greek mercenaries who brought knowledge of hoplite tactics and siege warfare. The lessons learned during this period would be applied when Carthage returned to aggressive action in Sicily. The Carthaginian recovery and return to Sicilian warfare in 410 before the Common Era demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptation. Hannibal the Magonid, grandson of the Hamilcar who died at Himera, led a carefully planned campaign that showed how thoroughly the Carthaginians had studied their previous failures. The army assembled for this campaign, while still diverse, was better organised and equipped than its predecessor. The inclusion of siege equipment and engineers capable of conducting sophisticated siege operations represented new capabilities that would prove decisive. The siege and destruction of Selinus in 409 before the Common Era announced Carthage's return as a major military power. The Carthaginians employed siege towers, battering rams, and catapults in a systematic assault that overwhelmed the city's defences. The brutal sack of Selinus, with much of the population killed or enslaved, sent a clear message about Carthaginian determination and capabilities. The psychological warfare aspects of this brutality, while morally reprehensible, proved effective in weakening Greek resistance to subsequent Carthaginian advances. The capture of Himera, site of the earlier Carthaginian defeat, held special significance for Carthaginian prestige and morale. Hannibal reportedly sacrificed 3,000 Greek prisoners on the spot where his grandfather had died, an act of vengeance that demonstrated the long memory and patient retribution that characterized Carthaginian foreign policy. The systematic destruction of Himera erased a symbol of Greek victory while asserting Carthaginian dominance. The campaign continued with successful attacks on Acragas and Gela, demonstrating Carthaginian ability to conduct sustained operations despite the challenges of distance and logistics. The figure of Dionysius I of Syracuse, who ruled from 405 to 367 before the Common Era, dominated the next phase of Carthaginian Greek conflict. This remarkable leader, combining military genius with political ruthlessness, transformed Syracuse into the most powerful Greek city in the West. His conflicts with Carthage, spanning nearly 4 decades, included major wars, temporary peaces, and constant military preparation. The personal rivalry between Dionysius and successive Carthaginian commanders added dramatic intensity to what were already bitter conflicts over territory and power. Dionysius's military innovations, particularly in siege warfare and naval technology, challenged Carthaginian advantages and forced continuous adaptation. His development of the quinquereme, a larger and more powerful warship than the traditional trireme, triggered a naval arms race that would transform Mediterranean warfare. His use of catapults and other siege engines, some of his own design, matched Carthaginian capabilities in siege warfare. His ability to mobilize Syracuse's resources for sustained warfare, including the construction of massive fortifications and the maintenance of large mercenary armies, created a Greek power capable of matching Carthaginian strength. The wars between Dionysius and Carthage saw dramatic reversals of fortune that demonstrated the balanced nature of the conflict. Carthaginian victories, such as the naval Battle of Cannae, were matched by Greek successes like Dionysius's sack of the Carthaginian base at Motia. The fighting ranged across Sicily, with cities changing hands multiple times and populations suffering the devastating consequences of prolonged warfare. The use of increasingly sophisticated military technology, including early forms of chemical warfare, such as burning sulfur to create toxic smoke, showed how the conflict drove military innovation. The Battle of Karbala in 377 before the Common Era exemplified the devastating nature of these conflicts. Mago, the Carthaginian commander, led an army that included innovative military units, such as war chariots and heavily armoured cavalry. Dionysius countered with his own innovations, including improved artillery and novel tactical formations. The battle resulted in catastrophic Carthaginian losses, with Mago himself among the dead. Yet even this severe defeat did not end Carthaginian involvement in Sicily, demonstrating the strategic importance both powers attached to the island. The peace treaties negotiated between Carthage and Syracuse revealed sophisticated diplomatic practices and pragmatic recognition of military realities. The Treaty of 374 before the Common Era, following another round of inconclusive warfare, established the Halykos River as the boundary between Carthaginian and Greek spheres of influence in Sicily. This agreement, while never fully satisfactory to either side, provided a framework for coexistence that would be repeatedly violated and renegotiated. The inclusion of provisions for trade, the treatment of refugees and the status of indigenous peoples showed the complex issues these agreements needed to address. The period following Dionysius's death in 367 witnessed continued instability and conflict, though generally at lower intensity than during his reign. His successors lacked his ability and resources, while Carthage faced challenges in other parts of its empire that limited commitment to Sicilian ventures. The pattern of raid and counter-raid, siege and relief, diplomatic manoeuvre and military demonstration continued, with neither side able to achieve decisive superiority. This strategic stalemate reflected both the balanced capabilities of the combatants and the difficulties of achieving total victory in ancient warfare. The arrival of new actors in the Sicilian theatre complicated Carthaginian-Greek relations. The intervention of Pyrrhus of Epirus in 278 before the Common Era brought a formidable military commander with veteran troops from the Greek mainland. His initial successes against both Carthaginians and Romans demonstrated the vulnerability of established powers to skilled external intervention. Yet his ultimate failure and withdrawal showed the difficulties of maintaining military operations far from home without reliable local support, a lesson both Carthage and Rome would remember. The military techniques developed during these centuries of conflict influenced warfare throughout the Mediterranean. The integration of different military traditions, Greek hoplite tactics, Carthaginian naval expertise, indigenous guerrilla techniques, and innovations from various sources, created a sophisticated military synthesis. The use of combined arms tactics, coordinating infantry, cavalry, artillery, and naval forces, reached new levels of complexity. The development of logistics systems capable of supporting large armies in extended campaigns established precedents for later military operations. The evolution of siege warfare during the Carthaginian-Greek conflicts deserves particular attention for its lasting influence on military engineering. Both sides developed increasingly sophisticated techniques for attacking and defending fortified positions, innovations that would be studied and employed by military commanders for centuries to come. The Carthaginians, learning from initial failures against Greek fortifications, invested heavily in siege technology and the training of specialized engineers. Siege towers grew taller and more elaborate, incorporating protective shields, boarding bridges, and artillery platforms. Battering rams became more powerful, with protective coverings and suspension systems that increased their effectiveness against stone walls. The cultural exchanges that occurred despite the endemic warfare created lasting influences on both civilizations. Carthaginian aristocrats adopted certain Greek customs, including symposia-style dining and appreciation for Greek art and literature. Greek mercenaries serving in Carthaginian armies brought their military traditions, but also absorbed Carthaginian practices, creating hybrid fighting styles that combined the best of both traditions. The presence of Greek craftsmen in Carthaginian territories and Carthaginian merchants in Greek cities facilitated technology transfer and cultural diffusion that transcended political boundaries. Naval warfare underwent revolutionary changes during these conflicts, with both sides contributing innovations that transformed Mediterranean maritime combat. The Carthaginians developed new ramming tactics that maximized the effectiveness of their reinforced bronze rams, while Greek naval architects experimented with different hull designs that improved speed and maneuverability. The coordination of naval and land operations, essential for successful campaigns in Sicily, required new command structures and communication methods. The use of naval blockades to starve cities into submission became a standard strategy, requiring sustained naval presence and sophisticated logistics. The economic dimensions of these prolonged conflicts profoundly affected both Carthaginian and Greek societies. The costs of maintaining large armies and fleets, constructing fortifications, and rebuilding destroyed cities strained financial resources and required new forms of taxation and resource mobilization. War became an industry in itself, with arms manufacturers, military contractors, and mercenary recruiters profiting from continued conflict. The disruption of trade routes and agricultural production created economic hardships that sometimes influenced military and diplomatic decisions more than battlefield victories or defeats. The role of indigenous Sicilian peoples in these conflicts, often overlooked in Greek and Roman sources, proved frequently decisive. The Sicels, Sicans, and Elymians possessed intimate knowledge of local terrain, provided crucial intelligence, and could tip the balance in closely contested campaigns. Both Carthaginians and Greeks competed for indigenous support through diplomacy, bribery, and coercion. Indigenous communities, far from being passive victims, actively manipulated the rivalry between major powers to preserve their autonomy and advance their interests. Some indigenous leaders achieved considerable power and influence by skillfully navigating the complex political landscape. The religious and ideological dimensions of the conflicts added intensity beyond mere territorial competition. Greek propaganda portrayed the wars as struggles between civilization and barbarism, freedom and tyranny, though the reality was far more complex. Carthaginian religious practices, particularly child sacrifice, were used to demonize the enemy and justify extreme violence. Both sides sought divine favor through elaborate rituals, sacrifices, and the construction of temples commemorating victories. The interpretation of omens and oracles influenced strategic decisions, with religious considerations sometimes overriding military logic. Intelligence operations and espionage played increasingly important roles as the conflicts evolved. Both Carthaginians and Greeks developed networks of spies and informants who provided information about enemy plans, troop movements, and political developments. The use of deception, including false intelligence and disinformation campaigns, became sophisticated tools of warfare. Code systems for communicating sensitive information, though primitive by modern standards, represented early attempts at cryptography. The recruitment of traitors and the encouragement of defections through bribes and promises became standard practices that required constant vigilance against infiltration. The treatment of prisoners and non-combatants during these wars varied considerably, depending on circumstances and commanders. Mass enslavement of defeated populations was common, feeding the labour demands of ancient economies. Yet there were also instances of remarkable clemency, with defeated enemies incorporated into victors' forces or allowed to depart under negotiated terms. The development of conventions regarding the treatment of heralds, the burial of the dead, and the sanctity of religious sites showed the emergence of primitive international law even amid brutal conflict. The transformation of military service and its social implications affected both Carthaginian and Greek societies profoundly. The increasing reliance on mercenary forces rather than citizen soldiers changed the relationship between military service and political participation. Professional soldiers, with loyalty to pay rather than patriotism, required different management than citizen militias. The emergence of military specialists, engineers, artillerymen, logistics experts, created new career paths and social mobility opportunities. Veterans of these campaigns, whether citizens or mercenaries, formed distinct social groups with their own interests and political influence. The First Punic War, the collision between Carthage and Rome that began in 264 before the Common Era, represented more than a conflict between two expanding powers. It marked the beginning of a struggle that would determine the fate of the Mediterranean world for millennia to come. The First Punic War, lasting 23 years and claiming hundreds of thousands of lives, transformed both combatants and established patterns of conflict that would define their relationship until Carthage's final destruction. This war, fought primarily for control of Sicily, but expanding to encompass much of the western Mediterranean, tested the limits of ancient states' ability to mobilize resources, maintain public support, and adapt to changing military circumstances. The origins of the conflict lay not in grand strategic planning, but in the chaotic politics of a divided Sicily. The Mamertines, Italian mercenaries who had seized the city of Messana, found themselves threatened by Hero II of Syracuse. In desperation, they appealed simultaneously to both Carthage and Rome for protection, creating a diplomatic crisis that would escalate into general war. The Carthaginians, following their traditional policy of preventing any single power from dominating Sicily, dispatched a garrison to Messana. The Romans, despite having no significant interests in Sicily and limited naval capabilities, decided to intervene, driven by a complex mixture of defensive concerns, opportunistic expansion, and the influence of ambitious politicians. The Roman decision to cross into Sicily represented a momentous break with previous policy. Rome had only recently completed the unification of peninsular Italy and possessed no significant naval forces. The prospect of challenging Carthage, the dominant maritime power of the western Mediterranean, seemed almost foolhardy, yet the Romans possessed advantages that would prove decisive: a seemingly inexhaustible supply of citizen soldiers, a political system that maintained unity despite setbacks, and above all, a remarkable ability to learn from defeats and adapt to new forms of warfare. The initial phases of the war demonstrated both powers' strengths and weaknesses. Roman legions, disciplined and effective in land combat, quickly established control over much of eastern Sicily. The siege of Syracuse, which ended with Hero switching sides to ally with Rome, showed Roman diplomatic flexibility and military pressure working in combination. Yet Carthaginian control of the sea allowed them to supply their strongholds, raid the Italian coast, and prevent any decisive Roman victory. The war settled into a costly stalemate, with neither side able to leverage their advantages into strategic success. The Roman decision to build a fleet represented one of the most audacious acts in military history. Using a captured Carthaginian quinquereme as a model, the Romans constructed over 100 warships in just 60 days, according to ancient sources. While this timeline seems impossibly compressed, the achievement remains remarkable. The Romans, recognizing their inferior seamanship, developed the corvus, a boarding bridge that allowed them to transform naval battles into infantry combat on ship decks. This innovation, though making ships less seaworthy, neutralized Carthaginian naval superiority and allowed Roman soldiers to employ their combat skills at sea. The Battle of Mylae in 260 before the Common Era marked Rome's arrival as a naval power. The consul Gaius Duilius, commanding the new Roman fleet, defeated a Carthaginian force despite the Romans' inexperience at sea. The corvus proved devastatingly effective, allowing Roman marines to board and capture Carthaginian vessels whose crews were unprepared for this novel tactic. The psychological impact of this victory was enormous, shattering the myth of Carthaginian naval invincibility and encouraging Roman confidence in their ability to compete at sea. The economic strain of prolonged warfare affected both powers profoundly. Carthage, despite its vast wealth, struggled to pay its mercenary armies and maintain its fleets. The government resorted to extraordinary taxation, loans from wealthy citizens, and even the melting down of religious artifacts to fund the war effort. Rome faced similar challenges with the construction and repeated reconstruction of fleets, draining the treasury. The human costs were even more severe, with entire generations of young men consumed by the conflict. The social and demographic impacts of these losses would influence both societies for decades. Naval technology evolved rapidly during the war as both sides sought advantages. The Romans abandoned the corvus after it was implicated in several ships' losses during storms, instead emphasizing improved seamanship and ramming tactics. Both sides experimented with larger ships, with hexaremes and even larger vessels appearing in major battles. Artillery mounted on ships, including catapults and ballistae, added a new dimension to naval combat. The development of specialized vessels for different purposes, fast scouts, heavy battleships, transport vessels, showed increasing sophistication in naval warfare. The role of Sicily's population during the war demonstrated the complexities of ancient imperialism. Different cities and communities shifted allegiances based on immediate circumstances and long-term calculations. Some populations suffered terribly, with cities besieged, sacked, and their inhabitants enslaved. Others prospered by providing supplies and services to the competing armies. The indigenous Sicilian peoples, caught between the major powers, sought to preserve what autonomy they could while avoiding the worst consequences of the conflict. Their local knowledge and support often proved crucial for military operations. Logistics emerged as perhaps the decisive factor in the war's outcome. The ability to supply forces operating in Sicily, maintain fleets at sea, and sustain sieges for months or years required organizational capabilities that pushed both states to their limits. The Romans developed administrative structures and supply systems that would later support their conquest of the entire Mediterranean. The Carthaginians, despite their commercial expertise, struggled to maintain regular supplies to their forces in Sicily, particularly after losing naval superiority. The unglamorous work of organizing transport ships, accumulating supplies, and maintaining supply lines proved as important as tactical brilliance or individual courage. The war's final phase saw both exhaustion and determination in equal measure. The decisive Battle of the Aegates Islands in 241 before the Common Era resulted from Roman desperation and resourcefulness. With the treasury empty, wealthy Romans privately funded the construction of a new fleet, hoping to recoup their investment from eventual victory. This fleet, commanded by Gaius Lutatius Catulus, intercepted a Carthaginian convoy attempting to supply Hamilcar's forces in Sicily. The Roman victory was complete, with 50 Carthaginian ships sunk and 70 captured. This defeat, combined with war exhaustion and political pressure in Carthage, forced the government to seek peace. The peace negotiations revealed the changed balance of power in the Western Mediterranean. Carthage agreed to evacuate Sicily completely, pay a massive indemnity of 3,200 talents over 10 years, and release all Roman prisoners without ransom. The loss of Sicily, which had been contested between Carthaginians and Greeks for 3 centuries, represented a fundamental shift in Carthaginian strategic position. The indemnity, while payable given Carthaginian wealth, created financial pressures that would contribute to future conflicts. Perhaps most significantly, the war established Rome as a major naval power, capable of projecting force throughout the Mediterranean. The immediate aftermath of the war brought little peace to either power. Carthage faced the mercenary war, a brutal conflict with its unpaid soldiers that nearly destroyed the state. Rome, emboldened by victory, seized Sardinia and Corsica from Carthage during this crisis, adding insult to injury and storing up resentments that would fuel future conflicts. The transformation of Sicily into Rome's first overseas province created new administrative challenges and opportunities, establishing precedents for Roman imperial governance that would be applied across 3 continents. The strategic lessons learned during the First Punic War influenced military thinking for generations. The importance of naval power for controlling the Mediterranean became axiomatic. The limitations of mercenary armies demonstrated by Carthage's difficulties reinforced the value of citizen soldiers, or at least reliable professional forces. The significance of economic resources for sustaining prolonged conflicts was starkly demonstrated. Both powers would apply these lessons in future conflicts, though often in different ways reflecting their distinct political and social systems. Between the wars, the Mercenary War and Barcid Spain, the period between the First and Second Punic Wars witnessed Carthage's greatest crisis and most remarkable recovery, transforming from near destruction to renewed imperial power through the genius of one extraordinary family. The Mercenary War that erupted immediately after peace with Rome brought Carthage closer to annihilation than any external enemy had managed, while the subsequent Barcid conquest of Spain created a new power base that would enable Carthage's greatest challenge to Roman supremacy. These 2 decades revealed both the fundamental weaknesses of the Carthaginian system and its capacity for regeneration under capable leadership. The Mercenary War, known to the Carthaginians as the Truceless War for its exceptional brutality, began with what should have been a routine administrative matter. 20,000 mercenary soldiers returning from Sicily after the peace with Rome assembled at Sica to await payment. These men, drawn from across the Mediterranean and North Africa, Libyans, Iberians, Gauls, Greeks and others, had fought for years with the promise of substantial rewards. The Carthaginian government, financially exhausted by the war with Rome, and facing the prospect of paying the enormous indemnity, attempted to negotiate reduced payments. This miscalculation would nearly destroy the Carthaginian state. The mercenaries' grievances went beyond simple wage disputes. Many had served for years in difficult conditions, watching comrades die while Carthaginian citizens remained safely at home. They had observed Carthaginian wealth and knew the state could pay if it chose. The government's attempt to negotiate separately with different ethnic groups, hoping to divide and weaken the mercenaries' bargaining position, instead united them in fury against what they saw as betrayal and manipulation. The spark that ignited open rebellion came when Carthaginian officials arrested negotiators who were pressing for full payment, transforming a labour dispute into a war for survival. The rebellion spread with terrifying speed throughout Carthaginian territory in North Africa. Libyan subjects, resentful of Carthaginian domination and heavy taxation, joined the revolt en masse. Cities that had been under Carthaginian control for centuries declared independence or sided with the rebels. The rebel army, swelling to perhaps 70,000 fighters, possessed military experience, knowledge of Carthaginian tactics, and burning hatred for their former employers. They controlled the countryside, besieged loyal cities, and even threatened Carthage itself. The situation appeared hopeless, with Carthage's traditional military system, dependent on those very mercenaries now in revolt, completely collapsed. The Carthaginian response to this existential crisis revealed both desperation and determination. Citizens who had long avoided military service now took up arms to defend their city. Slaves were promised freedom in exchange for military service. Women contributed jewellery and precious objects to fund the war effort. Most crucially, the government turned to Hamilcar Barca, the undefeated commander from the First Punic War, granting him extraordinary powers to save the state. Hamilcar's appointment marked not just a military decision, but a political revolution, elevating military competence over traditional aristocratic precedents. Hamilcar's conduct of the war demonstrated tactical brilliance and strategic ruthlessness that would characterize Barcid leadership. Unable to match rebel numbers, he relied on superior discipline, innovative tactics, and psychological warfare. He trained his citizen soldiers to fight as disciplined units rather than individual warriors. He employed elephants not just as weapons but as symbols of Carthaginian power. Most importantly, he exploited divisions among the rebels, offering amnesty to those who defected while showing no mercy to those who continued resistance. His famous tactic of having elephants trample prisoners served to terrify enemies and demonstrate the consequences of rebellion. The figure of Marthos, the Libyan rebel leader, emerged as Hamilcar's primary antagonist in a conflict that became intensely personal. Marthos combined military skill with political acumen, maintaining unity among diverse rebel groups while conducting effective military operations. His capture and torture of Carthaginian prisoners, including prominent citizens, escalated the cycle of atrocity and reprisal that made the war exceptionally brutal, even by ancient standards. The propaganda war between the two sides, with each depicting the other as barbarous and treacherous, influenced how the conflict was remembered and recorded. The siege of Carthage itself represented the rebellion's high point and the state's darkest hour. Rebel forces cut off land approaches to the city while attempting to block maritime supply routes. The sight of rebel camps from Carthage's walls created panic among citizens unaccustomed to direct military threat. Food shortages, disease, and the constant fear of the city falling tested social cohesion. Yet Carthage's walls held its citizens maintained discipline, and critically, its naval superiority allowed supplies to reach the city by sea. The failure to completely blockade Carthage proved to be the rebellion's strategic mistake, allowing the city to survive and eventually counterattack. The intervention of Rome and Syracuse, though limited, proved significant in Carthage's survival. Both powers, despite recent enmity with Carthage, recognized that a rebel victory might destabilize the entire Western Mediterranean. Rome allowed Carthaginian recruiting in Italy and permitted grain shipments to the besieged city. Syracuse provided military supplies and technical assistance. This pragmatic support demonstrated the complex calculations of international politics, where yesterday's enemy might become tomorrow's necessary partner. The rebels' attempts to secure foreign support largely failed, leaving them diplomatically isolated. The war's turning point came with Hamilcar's victory at the Battle of the Soar, named for the mountain ridge where it occurred. Through careful manoeuvring, Hamilcar trapped a large rebel force in a valley, surrounding them with his smaller but more disciplined army. The systematic destruction of this rebel army, with thousands killed and captured, broke the rebellion's military power. The psychological impact was even greater, demonstrating that Carthaginian recovery was possible, and encouraging defections from the rebel cause. Cities and tribes that had supported the rebellion began seeking terms with Carthage, hoping to avoid retribution. The final phase of the war saw desperate rebel resistance and merciless Carthaginian retribution. Mathos and remaining rebel leaders, knowing they could expect no mercy, fought with the fury of the doomed. The siege of Tunis, where the last rebel forces made their stand, witnessed atrocities on both sides that shocked even hardened ancient observers. When the city finally fell, the Carthaginian revenge was terrible. Mathos was tortured to death in elaborate public ceremonies, while thousands of rebels were crucified along the roads as warnings against future rebellion. The Libyan population, collectively punished for supporting the revolt, faced increased taxation and reduced autonomy. The mercenary wars' aftermath left Carthage transformed in fundamental ways. The traditional system of relying primarily on mercenary forces was partially abandoned, with greater emphasis on citizen participation and the development of reliable subject forces. The Barcid faction, having saved the state, gained political dominance that would shape Carthaginian policy for the next generation. The economic devastation required new sources of revenue, driving the decision to expand into Spain. Perhaps most importantly, the near-death experience created a determination to never again be so vulnerable, influencing the aggressive policies that would lead to renewed conflict with Rome. The loss of Sardinia to Rome during the Mercenary War added injury to insult. While Carthage struggled for survival, Rome opportunistically seized the island, claiming somewhat disingenuously that Carthaginian weakness invited disorder that threatened Roman interests. When Carthage protested, Rome threatened renewed war, forcing Carthage to acquiesce and pay an additional indemnity. This blatant aggression, violating the spirit if not the letter of the peace treaty, created lasting resentment in Carthage. The injustice of losing Sardinia while fighting for survival against rebels would be remembered and would influence Carthaginian attitudes toward Rome for a generation. The decision to expand into Spain represented both necessity and opportunity. Carthage needed new revenues to pay the Roman indemnity and rebuild after the mercenary wars' devastation. Spain offered vast resources, silver mines, agricultural lands, and warlike populations that could provide military manpower. Phoenician trading posts had existed on the Spanish coast for centuries, providing bases for expansion. Most importantly, Spain was far enough from Rome to allow Carthaginian development without immediate Roman interference, or so the Carthaginians hoped. Hamilcar Barca's expedition to Spain in 237 before the Common Era began the creation of what amounted to a Barcid family empire within the larger Carthaginian state. Taking his young son Hannibal, who according to legend swore eternal enmity to Rome at this time, Hamilcar began systematic conquest of southern Spain. His approach combined military force with diplomatic skill, conquering some tribes while allying with others. He founded new cities, most notably Acre Luce, establishing Carthaginian administrative control. The wealth flowing from Spanish silver mines quickly validated the expansion's economic rationale. The indigenous peoples of Spain, Iberians, Celtiberians, and others, responded to Carthaginian expansion in varied ways. Some tribes, impressed by Carthaginian military power and attracted by economic opportunities, allied willingly with the newcomers. Others resisted fiercely, conducting guerrilla warfare that exploited their knowledge of difficult terrain. The Carthaginians learned to adapt their tactics to Spanish conditions, developing lighter, more mobile forces capable of operating in mountainous terrain. The recruitment of Spanish warriors, particularly the famous Spanish sword-armed infantry, added new capabilities to Carthaginian armies. Hamilcar's death in 228, drowning while crossing a river during a military campaign, might have ended Barcid expansion, but for the remarkable succession of his son-in-law Hasdrubal the Fair. Hasdrubal continued expansion through diplomacy more than warfare, reportedly marrying an Iberian princess to cement alliances. His foundation of Carthago Nova, New Carthage, modern Cartagena, created a magnificent capital for Barcid Spain, with excellent harbours, proximity to rich silver mines, and strong defensive positions. The city's rapid growth demonstrated Carthaginian urban planning capabilities and the economic dynamism of the Spanish enterprise. The administration of Barcid Spain developed along lines that gave the family quasi-royal status while maintaining nominal allegiance to Carthage. The Barcids commanded armies, collected taxes, founded cities, and conducted diplomacy with minimal oversight from the Carthaginian government. This autonomy, necessary given the distances involved and the need for quick decision-making, created what was essentially a state within a state. The vast wealth generated, much of which flowed to Carthage, brought political support and quieted potential criticism of Barcid independence. The treaty between Rome and Hasdrubal, establishing the Ebro River as the limit of Carthaginian expansion northward, represented an attempt to prevent conflict through diplomatic demarcation. This agreement, negotiated around 226, showed both powers' desire to avoid immediate confrontation while recognizing the potential for future conflict. The treaty's ambiguous status, whether it bound Carthage officially or just Hasdrubal personally, would later become a point of bitter dispute. The exclusion of Saguntum, a city south of the Ebro but allied to Rome, created a dangerous ambiguity that would provide the spark for the Second Punic War. The young Hannibal's education and preparation for leadership during this period shaped one of history's greatest military commanders. Growing up in army camps, he learned the practical aspects of warfare from experienced soldiers. His education included Greek tutors who taught him history, philosophy, and rhetoric, providing intellectual depth to complement military training. He learned multiple languages, essential for commanding diverse forces and conducting diplomacy. Most importantly, he absorbed his father's hatred of Rome and determination to reverse Carthage's defeat, creating the motivation that would drive his extraordinary career. The transformation of Carthaginian military capabilities in Spain laid the groundwork for future conflicts with Rome. The Spanish warriors recruited into Carthaginian service brought new fighting techniques and weapons, particularly the famous Spanish sword, Gladius Hispaniensis, that Rome itself would later adopt. The wealth from Spanish mines funded military innovations and the accumulation of vast military supplies. The training of armies in constant warfare against Spanish tribes created veteran forces far superior to newly recruited troops. The elephants bred and trained in Spain would march with Hannibal across the Alps in one of history's most famous military endeavours. Cultural exchange between Carthaginians and Iberians created a unique hybrid civilization in Barcid Spain. Carthaginian agricultural techniques and urban planning transformed the Spanish landscape. Iberian artistic styles influenced Carthaginian crafts, creating distinctive regional variations. Religious syncretism merged Carthaginian and Iberian deities, with local gods identified with Baal Hammon and Tanit. The Carthaginian script was adapted for Iberian languages, spreading literacy beyond the Phoenician-speaking population. This cultural fusion, though ended by Roman conquest, left lasting influences on Spanish development. The economic development of Spain under Barcid rule demonstrated Carthaginian organizational capabilities at their finest. Mining operations expanded dramatically, with new techniques for extracting and processing silver ore. Agricultural production increased through irrigation projects and the introduction of new crops. Manufacturing centres produced weapons, tools, and trade goods for local consumption and export. Road construction connected cities and facilitated military movement and commerce. Port facilities at Carthago Nova and other coastal cities handled increasing volumes of trade. This economic development created prosperity that won support from local populations who benefited from increased opportunities. The political situation in Carthage during the Barcid period reflected tensions between different factions and visions for the state's future. The Barcid faction, dominant due to their Spanish success and the memory of Hamilcar's salvation of the state during the Mercenary War, advocated aggressive policies toward Rome. The opposition, led by Hanno the Great, preferred peaceful development and worried about provoking Roman retaliation. These political divisions, while demonstrating Carthaginian political sophistication, also created vulnerabilities that Rome would later exploit. The debate over supporting Hannibal's war would prove particularly divisive. The Second Punic War, Hannibal's War, the assassination of Hasdrubal the Fair in 221 before the Common Era brought to power a 25-year-old commander whose name would echo through history as one of warfare's greatest geniuses and Rome's most dangerous enemy. Hannibal Barca, inheriting his father's hatred of Rome and commanding the magnificent army built in Spain, would launch a war that brought Rome closer to destruction than any other conflict in its history. The Second Punic War, lasting 17 years and fought across 3 continents, would test the limits of human endurance, military innovation, and political determination while transforming the Mediterranean world forever. Hannibal's preparations for war with Rome began immediately upon taking command, though he carefully concealed his ultimate intentions. The young commander first consolidated Barcid control in Spain, conducting campaigns that extended Carthaginian territory and secured his base of operations. The siege of Saguntum, beginning in 219, provided the casus belli that Hannibal sought. This city, allied with Rome despite being located well south of the Ebro River boundary, represented an intolerable Roman intrusion into what Hannibal considered Carthaginian sphere of influence. The 8-month siege demonstrated both Carthaginian determination and Roman inability, or unwillingness to aid their ally effectively. The strategic conception behind Hannibal's invasion of Italy ranked among the boldest in military history. Rather than fight defensively in Spain or Africa, where Roman naval superiority could prove decisive, Hannibal would carry the war to Italy itself. By marching overland through Spain and Gaul, crossing the Alps, and appearing in northern Italy, he would bypass Roman naval power, threaten Rome directly, and potentially trigger defections among Rome's Italian allies. The audacity of this plan, requiring a march of over 1,500 kilometres through hostile territory and across seemingly impassable mountains, reflected both Hannibal's genius and his understanding that conventional strategies offered little hope against Roman power. The army that Hannibal assembled for this extraordinary undertaking represented the culmination of Barcid military development in Spain. Ancient sources, though varying in details, suggest an initial force of around 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. This army's composition reflected its diverse origins: African infantry from Libya, Numidian light cavalry, Spanish swordsmen, Balearic slingers, and Gallic warriors recruited along the march. The challenge of commanding such a polyglot force, maintaining discipline and cohesion across linguistic and cultural boundaries, demonstrated Hannibal's exceptional leadership abilities. The march to Italy, begun in the spring of 218, immediately encountered challenges that would have defeated lesser commanders. The crossing of the Pyrenees required fighting through hostile tribes, while preserving the army's strength for greater challenges ahead. The passage through southern Gaul involved constant negotiation and occasional combat with Celtic tribes, some of whom saw opportunity in Hannibal's passage, while others viewed it as a threat. The crossing of the Rhone River, accomplished despite Roman attempts at interference, required innovative engineering to transport elephants and vast quantities of supplies across a major water barrier. The Alpine crossing in late 218 became the stuff of legend, an achievement that captured imaginations for millennia. The exact route remains debated, but the challenges were undeniable. Narrow paths above terrifying precipices, early winter snows, hostile mountain tribes, and the logistical nightmare of feeding tens of thousands of men and animals in barren terrain. The army that emerged in the Po Valley had been reduced to perhaps 26,000 men, but these survivors were hardened veterans bound to their commander by shared ordeal. The psychological impact of Hannibal's appearance in Italy, having achieved what Romans thought impossible, proved as valuable as the army itself. The Battle of the Trebia River in December 218 announced Hannibal's arrival with devastating effect. The Roman consul Sempronius Longus, eager for glory before his term expired, fell into Hannibal's carefully prepared trap. Numidian cavalry lured Roman forces across the frigid river, where they arrived cold, hungry, and disorganized to face Hannibal's prepared positions. The concealment of a force under Hannibal's brother Mago, who attacked the Roman rear at the crucial moment, turned defeat into disaster. Roman losses exceeded 20,000, while Hannibal's casualties were minimal. The victory brought Gallic tribes flocking to Hannibal's banner, providing replacements for his losses and demonstrating that Rome's Italian dominion might be more fragile than appeared. The Battle of Lake Trasimene in 217 demonstrated Hannibal's mastery of terrain and psychology. The consul Flaminius, pursuing Hannibal through Etruria, marched his army along a narrow defile between Lake Trasimene and surrounding hills. Hannibal had positioned his forces on the heights, concealed by morning mist. When the Romans were fully committed to the defile, Hannibal's forces attacked from all sides. The result was not a battle but a massacre, with 15,000 Romans killed, including Flaminius himself. The psychological impact was devastating. A Roman consul and his army had simply vanished, destroyed so completely that few survived to explain what happened. The appointment of Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator marked Rome's recognition that conventional tactics could not defeat Hannibal. Fabius adopted a strategy of avoiding direct confrontation while harassing Hannibal's foraging parties and preventing him from establishing a secure base. This Fabian strategy, though militarily sound, proved politically unpopular with Romans accustomed to aggressive action. Hannibal's ravaging of Italian countryside challenged Roman credibility with their allies, who wondered why Rome could not protect them. The tension between military necessity and political pressure would characterize Roman response throughout the war. The Battle of Cannae on August 2nd, 216, represented both Hannibal's greatest triumph and the worst defeat in Roman history. The Romans, having assembled the largest army in their history, perhaps 80,000 men, sought to crush Hannibal through sheer numbers. Hannibal, with roughly 50,000 troops, created a tactical masterpiece that military academies still study. He placed his weakest troops, Gauls and Spaniards, in the centre in a convex formation, with stronger African infantry on the flanks. As Roman pressure pushed back the centre, creating a concave formation, the African infantry wheeled inward, while cavalry, having defeated their Roman counterparts, attacked the Roman rear. The result was complete encirclement and systematic slaughter. Roman deaths numbered perhaps 70,000, including Consul Aemilius Paulus and 80 senators. Never before or after would Rome suffer such catastrophic losses in a single day. The aftermath of Cannae brought Rome to its darkest hour. Several Italian allies defected to Hannibal, including the crucial city of Capua. Macedonia allied with Carthage, threatening to open another front. Syracuse in Sicily revolted against Roman rule. Roman manpower, seemingly inexhaustible, had suffered grievous losses. Yet Rome's response demonstrated the extraordinary resilience that would make it master of the Mediterranean. The Senate rejected peace negotiations, prohibited public mourning beyond a fixed period, and mobilized every available resource. Slaves were freed and armed, boys and old men recruited, and even criminals released from prison to serve. This total mobilization, unprecedented in ancient warfare, showed Rome's determination to continue fighting regardless of cost. Hannibal's failure to march on Rome immediately after Cannae has been debated for over 2 millennia. His cavalry commander Hannibal reportedly said, "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal, but not how to use one." Yet Hannibal's decision reflected sound strategic reasoning rather than hesitation. Rome's walls were formidable, and Hannibal lacked siege equipment for a prolonged assault. His army, though victorious, was exhausted and had suffered significant casualties among his irreplaceable veterans. Most importantly, Hannibal's strategy depended not on destroying Rome directly, but on breaking apart the Italian confederation that provided Rome's strength. A failed siege of Rome might have reversed the psychological impact of Cannae and strengthened Roman resolve. The war's character changed fundamentally after Cannae, evolving from mobile operations to a complex struggle for control of cities and regions. Hannibal's attempt to build an anti-Roman coalition in Italy faced numerous challenges. Many Italian communities, bound to Rome by various arrangements and intimidated by Roman retribution, remained loyal despite Hannibal's victories. Those that did defect often provided limited support, viewing Hannibal as a temporary liberator rather than a permanent alternative to Roman rule. The need to garrison allied cities dispersed Hannibal's limited forces, reducing his capacity for offensive operations. The fundamental problem was that Hannibal could defeat Roman armies, but could not replace the Roman political and administrative system that held Italy together. The siege of Capua from 212 to 211 demonstrated the war's new dynamics and Rome's recovered confidence. Capua, the second city of Italy, and Hannibal's most important Italian ally, faced encirclement by Roman forces employing sophisticated siege works. Hannibal's attempts to relieve the siege, including a dramatic march on Rome itself designed to draw Roman forces away, failed to break Roman determination. When Capua finally fell, Roman vengeance was terrible. The city's leaders were executed, its population enslaved or dispersed, and its political existence terminated. This harsh example discouraged other potential defectors and showed that Rome would neither forget nor forgive betrayal. The extension of the war to other theatres diluted its intensity while preventing either side from concentrating resources for a decisive blow. In Spain, Publius and Gnaeus Scipio fought to prevent Carthaginian reinforcements from reaching Hannibal while attempting to destroy the Barcid power base. Their initial successes were reversed when both brothers died in battle in 211, but the arrival of the younger Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Africanus, would transform the Spanish theatre. In Sicily, the genius of Archimedes helped Syracuse resist Roman siege for 2 years, his war machines becoming legendary, though the city ultimately fell to Marcus Claudius Marcellus in 212. The failure of Carthaginian reinforcement attempts proved crucial to the war's outcome. Hasdrubal Barca, Hannibal's brother, attempted to replicate Hannibal's march from Spain to Italy in 207. His army, moving faster than Hannibal's original march but lacking the element of surprise, was intercepted at the Metaurus River by Roman forces under Gaius Claudius Nero and Marcus Livius Salinator. The resulting battles saw Hasdrubal's complete defeat and death. When Hasdrubal's severed head was thrown into Hannibal's camp, it signalled the end of any hope for significant reinforcements. Hannibal reportedly said he now saw the fate of Carthage clearly written. The personality and genius of Scipio Africanus emerged as the counterweight to Hannibal's brilliance. Young, charismatic, and unconventional, Scipio understood that defeating Hannibal required thinking beyond traditional Roman military doctrine. His campaigns in Spain from 210 to 206 demonstrated tactical innovation and strategic vision comparable to Hannibal's. The capture of Carthago Nova, through a brilliant combination of intelligence gathering, rapid movement, and exploitation of natural phenomena, showed Scipio's ability to achieve surprise. His victories at Baecula and Ilipa destroyed Carthaginian power in Spain, while demonstrating mastery of complex tactical manoeuvres. Scipio's invasion of Africa in 204 represented the strategic boldness Rome had previously lacked. Despite senatorial opposition and limited resources, Scipio understood that threatening Carthage directly would force Hannibal's recall from Italy. His African campaign demonstrated diplomatic as well as military skill, winning over Numidian princes like Massinissa, who provided crucial cavalry support. The systematic destruction of Carthaginian camps and armies in Africa created panic in Carthage and vindicated Scipio's strategy. The Carthaginian government, which had provided limited support to Hannibal in Italy, now desperately recalled him to defend the homeland. The Battle of Zama in 202 brought the war's two greatest commanders into direct confrontation. Hannibal, returning to Africa after 15 years in Italy, commanded a hastily assembled army that lacked the quality of his Italian veterans. His 80 war elephants, intended to break Roman formations, were neutralized by Scipio's innovative tactics of creating lanes in his formation through which the elephants could be channeled. The superior Numidian cavalry, now fighting for Rome under Massinissa, defeated their Carthaginian counterparts and attacked Hannibal's rear, reversing the tactics of Cannae. The defeat was complete, with Carthaginian losses exceeding 20,000, while Roman casualties remained minimal. The peace terms imposed on Carthage in 201 reflected Rome's determination to prevent any future threat. Carthage lost all overseas possessions, its navy was reduced to 10 ships, and it was prohibited from waging war without Roman permission. An indemnity of 10,000 talents, payable over 50 years, would drain Carthaginian resources for generations. The surrender of all war elephants and prohibition on training more symbolically emasculated Carthaginian military power. Yet Rome, whether from exhaustion, respect for Carthaginian resilience, or calculation that a weakened Carthage could balance other powers, did not destroy the city itself. The war's impact transformed both powers and the broader Mediterranean world. Rome emerged as the dominant power, having survived its greatest crisis and demonstrated extraordinary resilience. The experience of total mobilization and the need to maintain forces across multiple theatres accelerated the development of Roman military and administrative institutions. The influx of wealth from conquered territories and indemnities began the economic transformation that would characterize the late Republic. Perhaps most significantly, Rome had learned it could project power anywhere in the Mediterranean, setting the stage for future expansion. For Carthage, defeat meant the end of its existence as a great power, though not yet its destruction. The loss of empire reduced Carthage to its African territories, ending 3 centuries of Mediterranean dominance. The war's costs in blood and treasure were staggering. Hundreds of thousands dead, vast wealth consumed, and the psychological trauma of coming so close to victory only to face complete defeat. Yet Carthaginian resilience would manifest once more in economic recovery that would ironically provoke Roman jealousy and lead to final destruction. The military innovations developed during the war influenced warfare for centuries. Hannibal's tactical masterpieces, particularly Cannae, became models studied by commanders throughout history. The integration of diverse military traditions, Roman discipline, Numidian cavalry tactics, Spanish sword fighting, elephant warfare, created new combined arms approaches. The importance of logistics and intelligence, demonstrated repeatedly during the war, established principles still relevant today. The development of strategic thinking beyond simple battlefield tactics marked a maturation in military science. The war's social and cultural impacts proved as significant as its military and political consequences. The exposure of hundreds of thousands of Romans to different cultures through military service broadened horizons and brought new ideas to Italy. Greek culture, encountered in southern Italy and Sicily, began its profound influence on Roman society. The influx of enslaved peoples from conquered territories transformed Italian agriculture and urban life. The emergence of successful generals as political powers, exemplified by Scipio, presaged the military dynasts who would eventually destroy the Republic. The figure of Hannibal himself transcended the historical moment to become an archetype of military genius and determined resistance to overwhelming power. His ability to maintain an army in hostile territory for 15 years, winning victory after victory against superior numbers, inspired admiration, even among his enemies. Roman mothers would frighten misbehaving children with Hannibal at the gates for generations. His influence on later commanders, from Julius Caesar to Napoleon, demonstrates the lasting impact of his innovations. The oath of eternal enmity to Rome, sworn as a child and maintained until death, became a symbol of implacable determination. The Carthaginian perspective on the war, largely lost due to the destruction of Carthaginian literature, can be partially reconstructed from archaeological evidence and hostile sources. The debates within Carthage about supporting Hannibal's war revealed deep political divisions between the military faction and those preferring peaceful commerce. The limited support provided to Hannibal in Italy, whether from inability or unwillingness, proved a fatal strategic error. The failure to coordinate operations across different theatres allowed Rome to defeat Carthaginian forces piecemeal. The reliance on one brilliant commander without developing institutional military excellence proved a crucial weakness. The Intermediate Period and Third Punic War. The half-century between Hannibal's defeat and Carthage's final destruction witnessed a remarkable economic recovery that demonstrated Carthaginian resilience, while ultimately sealing the city's fate. Stripped of its empire and military power, Carthage transformed itself into a commercial powerhouse whose prosperity aroused Roman envy and fear. The Third Punic War, beginning in 149 before the Common Era, represented not a clash between equals, but the deliberate annihilation of a weakened rival by a Rome that had become the Mediterranean's undisputed master. The complete destruction of Carthage in 146 eliminated one of antiquity's greatest civilizations and demonstrated the ruthless efficiency with which Rome would maintain its dominance. The immediate aftermath of the Second Punic War found Carthage politically divided and economically devastated, yet determined to survive and recover. Hannibal himself, despite military defeat, emerged as a political leader advocating reform and renewal. His election as Suffete in 196 demonstrated continued popular support and recognition that extraordinary measures were needed for recovery. His reforms targeted corruption in government, inefficiency in tax collection, and the aristocratic monopoly on power that had weakened Carthage during the war. The establishment of regular audits for public officials and the democratization of certain governmental positions threatened entrenched interests while improving administrative efficiency. The economic reforms implemented during this period transformed Carthage from a military empire into a commercial republic focused on trade and agriculture. Without the expenses of maintaining fleets and armies, Carthage could invest in productive enterprises. The agricultural development of the North African hinterland accelerated, with vast estates producing grain, olive oil, and wine for export. Carthaginian agricultural techniques, codified in Margot's treatises, achieved yields that amazed contemporary observers. The fertility of African soil under Carthaginian management became proverbial, with the region serving as a breadbasket for the growing Mediterranean economy. The expansion of trans-Saharan trade networks compensated partially for the loss of Mediterranean dominions. Carthaginian merchants, barred from military expansion, focused their energies on commercial penetration of African markets. Caravans crossing the desert brought gold, ivory, precious stones, and exotic products that commanded premium prices in Mediterranean markets. The development of new routes and trading partnerships with Saharan peoples demonstrated Carthaginian adaptability and commercial expertise. This African orientation, forced by circumstances, revealed opportunities that might have been exploited earlier had Carthage not been focused on Mediterranean expansion. Technological and industrial innovation continued despite political constraints. Carthaginian workshops produced high-quality goods that competed successfully in international markets. Textile production, particularly of fine fabrics dyed with the famous Tyrian purple, remained a Carthaginian specialty. Metalworking, glass-making, and pottery production maintained high standards that attracted customers despite political prejudices. The development of new techniques and designs showed that Carthaginian creativity had not been extinguished by military defeat. The ability to prosper through commerce and industry rather than conquest demonstrated alternative paths to power that Rome would later adopt. The payment of the war indemnity to Rome, rather than crushing Carthage, demonstrated its remarkable economic recovery. The 50-year payment schedule of 200 talents annually was met consistently, and Carthage even offered to pay the remaining balance early, an offer Rome refused, preferring to maintain financial leverage. This ability to generate surplus wealth while under heavy tribute obligations amazed and alarmed Roman observers. The source of this wealth, efficient administration, productive agriculture, and successful commerce, showed that Carthage had found ways to prosper within the constraints imposed by defeat. Roman supervision and interference in Carthaginian affairs created constant tensions that prevented genuine reconciliation. The treaty requirement that Carthage could not wage war without Roman permission effectively made Carthage a Roman protectorate. This restriction proved particularly galling when Numidian king Massinissa, Rome's ally, repeatedly encroached on Carthaginian territory. Unable to defend themselves militarily without Roman approval, which was never granted, the Carthaginians watched helplessly as Massinissa seized productive lands and important cities. These territorial losses, combined with the humiliation of being unable to respond, created deep resentment and desperation. The figure of Cato the Elder emerged as Carthage's most implacable enemy in Rome. His famous declaration, "Carthage must be destroyed," ending every speech regardless of topic. His embassy to Carthage in 157 revealed a city that had recovered its prosperity and population, with magnificent buildings, busy markets, and evident wealth. The sight of Carthaginian recovery alarmed Cato, who believed that Carthage's continued existence threatened Rome despite its military impotence. His propaganda campaign, emphasizing Carthaginian wealth and the potential for future revenge, gradually built support for a final reckoning. The display of fresh figs from Carthage in the Senate, demonstrating the city's proximity to Rome, provided a theatrical touch to his arguments. The Carthaginian political situation during this period reflected struggles between those advocating accommodation with Rome and those seeking to preserve independence through resistance. The democratic reforms implemented after the Second Punic War had given greater voice to the commercial classes, who generally preferred peace and prosperity to military adventures. Yet the constant Numidian provocations and Roman refusal to provide justice created pressure for military action. The debate over how to respond to Massinissa's aggression divided Carthaginian society, with some advocating patience and others demanding action, regardless of consequences. The outbreak of war with Numidia in 150 before the Common Era provided Rome with the pretext for final intervention. When Carthage finally responded militarily to Numidian aggression, technically violating the treaty with Rome, the Roman Senate seized the opportunity. The Carthaginian military response, though unsuccessful against Massinissa's forces, demonstrated that the city had rebuilt some military capacity. This revelation, combined with long-standing Roman fears and jealousies, led to the decision for war. The Roman declaration of war in 149 came with demands designed to ensure Carthage's destruction, regardless of compliance. The Roman demands escalated systematically, each compliance met with harsher requirements. First, Carthage was required to surrender 300 noble hostages, which was done. Then, complete disarmament was demanded, the surrender of all weapons and military equipment. The Carthaginians, desperately hoping to avoid war, complied, delivering 200,000 sets of armour and 2,000 catapults to the Romans. Finally, the consuls delivered the ultimate demand. The Carthaginians must abandon their city and resettle at least 10 miles from the sea. This demand, which meant the complete destruction of Carthage as a commercial power, finally provoked desperate resistance. The Carthaginian decision to resist, though militarily hopeless, reflected the recognition that compliance meant death for their civilization, even if individuals survived. The city's population, swelled by refugees from the countryside, united in determination to fight. The transformation of Carthage into an armed camp demonstrated remarkable resourcefulness and determination. Weapons were manufactured from every available material. Temples were stripped of metal decorations. Women cut their hair for catapult strings, and buildings were demolished to provide stones for projectiles. Slaves were freed and armed, creating a force of desperate defenders who knew that defeat meant death or enslavement. The Roman siege of Carthage, beginning in 149, initially progressed poorly despite overwhelming Roman superiority. The city's massive fortifications, strengthened over centuries, proved formidable obstacles. The triple wall system on the landward side, with towers, barracks, and stables for elephants and horses built into the fortifications, resisted Roman assault. The harbours, protected by chains and defending warships hastily constructed in the arsenals, prevented effective naval blockade. Carthaginian defenders, fighting with the fury of desperation, repulsed initial Roman attacks and even conducted successful sorties that destroyed Roman siege equipment. The appointment of Scipio Aemilianus, adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, as consul in 147 marked a turn in the siege's effectiveness. Scipio, demonstrating the organisational and tactical brilliance of his adoptive grandfather, systematically tightened the blockade. He constructed a massive mole across the harbour entrance, cutting Carthage off from maritime supply. When the Carthaginians cut a new channel to the sea and launched a fleet built in secret, Scipio defeated them in a final naval battle. The systematic reduction of Carthaginian defences, section by section, gradually compressed the defenders into an ever smaller area. The final assault on Carthage in spring 146 witnessed scenes of apocalyptic destruction and heroic resistance. Roman forces broke through the harbour defences and fought their way into the city proper. The battle raged for 6 days, and nights through Carthage's streets, with every house becoming a fortress. The multi-storey buildings of the city centre were cleared floor by floor, with defenders fighting to the death rather than surrender. The narrow streets became killing grounds where neither side gave quarter. Scipio ordered entire districts burned to create clear areas for troop movement, incinerating countless civilians hiding in buildings. The last stand on the Byrsa hill, where 900 defenders took refuge in the temple of Eschman, epitomized Carthaginian resistance. These survivors, including Hasdrubal the Boetharch, who had led the defence, held out until resistance became impossible. At the final moment, Hasdrubal surrendered himself to Scipio, an act of cowardice that disgusted both Romans and Carthaginians. His wife, denouncing his betrayal, threw herself and their children into the flames rather than surrender, joined by the remaining defenders who chose death over slavery. This dramatic finale, whether historically accurate in all details or embellished by later accounts, captured the tragic dignity of Carthage's end. The systematic destruction of Carthage following its capture represented an act of cultural annihilation rarely equalled in ancient history. The city was methodically demolished, with buildings razed and even foundations excavated. The story of sowing salt in the ruins, though probably legendary, symbolized Rome's determination that Carthage should never rise again. The surviving population, estimated at 50,000 from a pre-siege population of several 100,000, was sold into slavery. The libraries of Carthage were dispersed, with most documents destroyed, though some agricultural treatises were preserved and translated. The deliberate erasure of Carthaginian civilization extended to prohibiting resettlement of the site and placing religious curses on anyone who might attempt rebuilding. The distribution of Carthaginian territory revealed Roman imperial methods and rewards for allies. The city's immediate territory became the Roman province of Africa, directly administered by Roman governors. This rich agricultural land would become one of Rome's most valuable possessions, supplying grain for the growing population of Rome itself. Numidian allies received some territorial rewards, though less than expected, as Rome was careful not to create overly powerful clients. Greek cities that had supported Rome received favourable treatment, while those that had sided with Carthage faced punishment. The systematic organisation of the conquest demonstrated Roman administrative efficiency. The fate of other Carthaginian cities varied depending on their behaviour during the war. Cities that surrendered early received relatively lenient treatment, maintaining local autonomy under Roman oversight. Those that resisted faced destruction or severe punishment. Utica, which had defected to Rome early, became the capital of the new province and prospered under Roman rule. The differential treatment created incentives for quick submission in future Roman conquests, while demonstrating the consequences of resistance. The transformation of formerly Carthaginian territories into productive parts of the Roman Empire showed Rome's ability to absorb and exploit conquered lands. The impact of Carthage's destruction resonated throughout the Mediterranean world. The elimination of one of antiquity's greatest cities and oldest civilizations demonstrated Roman ruthlessness and power. Other states understood that Rome would tolerate no rivals and would destroy even weakened enemies if it served Roman interests. The psychological impact was profound. If Carthage could be erased, no city or civilization was safe from Roman power. This lesson influenced the behaviour of kingdoms and cities in their dealings with Rome, encouraging submission rather than resistance. Legacy and influence. The destruction of Carthage in 146 before the Common Era did not erase its contributions to human civilization, though Rome's victory ensured that Carthaginian achievements would be filtered through the lens of their conqueror's perspective. The legacy of Carthage, recovered through archaeological investigation, linguistic analysis, and careful reading of hostile sources, reveals a civilization whose innovations in commerce, navigation, agriculture, and governance influenced the development of the Mediterranean world and beyond. Understanding this legacy requires looking past Roman propaganda to recognize how profoundly Carthage shaped the ancient world and contributed to developments that would influence human progress for millennia. The Carthaginian contribution to maritime technology and navigation transformed humanity's relationship with the sea. Carthaginian shipbuilders developed vessel designs that balanced cargo capacity with seaworthiness, creating ships capable of long oceanic voyages. Their navigation techniques, using celestial observation, coastal landmarks, and understanding of seasonal wind patterns, enabled regular voyages beyond the Pillars of Hercules into the Atlantic. The Carthaginian exploration of the African coast, documented in Hanno's Periplus, pushed the boundaries of the known world and demonstrated possibilities for maritime exploration that would not be fully realized until the Age of Discovery. The commercial practices developed by Carthaginian merchants established precedents for international trade that influenced economic development throughout antiquity and beyond. Carthaginian innovations in banking, including letters of credit and international exchange mechanisms, facilitated commerce across linguistic and cultural boundaries. Their development of commercial law dealing with contracts, partnerships, and dispute resolution created frameworks adopted and adapted by successor civilizations. The concept of the commercial treaty, negotiated between equals and establishing mutual obligations, emerged from Carthaginian diplomatic practice and became fundamental to international relations. Agricultural techniques perfected in Carthaginian territories revolutionized farming in the ancient Mediterranean. The agricultural manuals of Mago, preserved through Roman translation, became authoritative texts on farming for centuries. Carthaginian innovations in irrigation, crop rotation, and soil management increased agricultural productivity dramatically. Their development of specialized agricultural estates, producing specific crops for export markets, prefigured modern agricultural specialization. The integration of animal husbandry with crop production, detailed in Carthaginian agricultural texts, created sustainable farming systems that maintained soil fertility while maximizing production. The Carthaginian approach to imperial administration, though ultimately unsuccessful against Roman power, offered alternative models for governing diverse populations. Unlike Roman direct rule and cultural assimilation, Carthaginian administration generally preserved local institutions while extracting resources and maintaining security. This lighter touch, requiring fewer administrators and soldiers, allowed Carthage to control vast territories with limited resources. The Carthaginian practice of ruling through local elites, incorporated into the imperial system but maintaining traditional authority, influenced later imperial administrations, including, ironically, Rome's own evolution toward indirect rule in certain provinces. The influence of Carthaginian military innovations extended far beyond their own armies. The use of war elephants, though ultimately unsuccessful against Roman tactics, captured imaginations and influenced military thinking for centuries. Carthaginian developments in siege warfare, including sophisticated catapults and siege towers, advanced military engineering. Their integration of diverse military traditions, creating armies that combined different fighting styles and weapons systems, demonstrated the advantages of military diversity. The concept of the professional military commander, exemplified by the Barcid family, challenged traditional notions of aristocratic military leadership and influenced the development of professional military service. Carthaginian religious practices and beliefs, though often misunderstood and deliberately misrepresented by their enemies, contributed to the religious syncretism that characterized the ancient Mediterranean. The spread of the cult of Tanit throughout Carthaginian territories created shared religious experiences that transcended ethnic boundaries. The Carthaginian practice of identifying foreign gods with their own deities facilitated cultural exchange and religious tolerance. Even the controversial practice of child sacrifice, whatever its actual nature, provoked philosophical and theological debates about the nature of religious obligation and the limits of acceptable practice that influenced the development of religious thought. The Carthaginian language, though extinct as a spoken tongue, influenced the development of other languages and writing systems. Punic inscriptions found throughout the former Carthaginian Empire demonstrate the spread of literacy and administrative sophistication. The adaptation of the Phoenician alphabet to local languages in Spain, North Africa, and elsewhere facilitated the spread of writing. Latin itself borrowed Carthaginian terms, particularly for commercial and agricultural concepts, preserving Carthaginian linguistic contributions within the language that would dominate Western civilization. Urban planning and architecture in Carthaginian cities established patterns that influenced city development throughout the Mediterranean. The Carthaginian integration of commercial, residential, religious, and industrial districts within planned urban spaces created functional cities that balanced different needs. Their development of sophisticated harbour facilities, combining military and commercial functions, provided models for port cities throughout antiquity. The Carthaginian innovation of the kothon, a protected inner harbour, was copied in numerous Mediterranean ports. Their techniques for urban water supply and waste management, including aqueducts, cisterns, and drainage systems, advanced urban sanitation. The Carthaginian contribution to industrial production and manufacturing techniques advanced technological development in numerous fields. Their perfection of purple dye production from murex shellfish created a luxury industry that would continue for centuries after Carthage's fall. Carthaginian glass-making techniques, particularly the production of coloured glass and complex vessel forms, influenced the development of glass technology throughout the Mediterranean. Their metalworking techniques, especially in producing high-quality steel weapons and tools, were adopted by conquering Romans who recognized their superiority. The intellectual and cultural achievements of Carthage, though largely lost with the destruction of Carthaginian literature, can be partially reconstructed from references and influences. The existence of Carthaginian histories, philosophical works, and technical manuals is attested by ancient sources, though the works themselves are lost. The Carthaginian influence on Greek and Roman thought, particularly in practical fields like agriculture, navigation, and commerce, demonstrates intellectual exchange despite political hostility. The preservation and translation of some Carthaginian works by Romans shows recognition of their value even as Carthage itself was destroyed. The economic systems developed by Carthage influenced Mediterranean commerce long after the city's destruction. The concept of the commercial empire, generating wealth through trade rather than territorial exploitation, provided an alternative model to military imperialism. Carthaginian trading posts and commercial practices continued under Roman rule, with many former Carthaginian ports maintaining their commercial importance. The trade routes established by Carthaginian merchants, particularly trans-Saharan routes bringing African products to Mediterranean markets, continued to be used for centuries. The Carthaginian demonstration that commercial wealth could support great power status influenced later maritime republics like Venice and Genoa. The Roman adoption and adaptation of Carthaginian innovations demonstrates the conquered civilization's lasting influence on its conqueror. Romans adopted Carthaginian agricultural techniques wholesale, with Mago's treatises becoming standard references for Roman farmers. The Roman navy incorporated Carthaginian ship designs and naval tactics. Roman commerce utilized Carthaginian trade routes and commercial practices. Even in destruction, Carthage taught Rome valuable lessons: the importance of controlling North Africa's agricultural wealth, the value of maritime power, and the necessity of eliminating potential rivals completely. The site of Carthage itself, rebuilt as a Roman city by Julius Caesar and Augustus, became one of the empire's greatest cities, demonstrating the enduring value of Carthaginian geographical and commercial insights. The influence of Carthage on North African development persisted despite Roman conquest and colonization. Indigenous peoples who had interacted with Carthage for centuries maintained Carthaginian agricultural techniques, religious practices, and social customs. The Punic language survived in North Africa for centuries after Carthage's fall, used alongside Latin in many communities. Neo-Punic culture, blending Carthaginian traditions with Roman and indigenous influences, created a distinctive North African civilization that would influence the region's development through the Islamic conquest and beyond. The archaeological rediscovery of Carthage beginning in the 19th century has progressively revealed the sophistication and achievements of Carthaginian civilization. Excavations at Carthage and other Carthaginian sites have uncovered urban planning, architectural techniques, and artistic productions that challenge stereotypes of Carthaginian cultural inferiority. The discovery of the Topet sanctuaries has provoked intense debates about Carthaginian religion and society, forcing reconsideration of ancient sources and modern assumptions. Maritime archaeology has revealed Carthaginian shipwrecks that demonstrate sophisticated construction techniques and extensive trade networks. Each discovery adds to our understanding of a civilization known primarily through its enemies' accounts. The historiographical treatment of Carthage reflects changing attitudes toward empire, commerce, and cultural difference. Ancient historians, writing from the Roman perspective, portrayed Carthage as the necessary enemy whose destruction validated Roman virtue and destiny. Medieval and Renaissance scholars, influenced by Augustine of Hippo, who lived in Roman Carthage, saw the city's destruction as divine judgment. Enlightenment historians began to recognize Carthaginian contributions to civilization and question the justice of its destruction. Modern historians, informed by post-colonial perspectives and archaeological evidence, increasingly recognize Carthage as a sophisticated civilization whose destruction represented a tremendous loss to human cultural diversity. The symbolic significance of Carthage has transcended historical reality to become a powerful metaphor in Western culture. Carthaginian peace entered political vocabulary as a term for a settlement that destroys the defeated party. Delenda est Carthago, Carthage must be destroyed, became a symbol of implacable determination to eliminate an enemy. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps became an archetype of military audacity and determination against overwhelming odds. The fall of Carthage has been invoked repeatedly as a warning about the fate of commercial republics facing military empires, influencing political thought from Machiavelli to modern international relations theorists. The comparison between Carthage and Rome has provided fertile ground for political and philosophical reflection. The contrast between Carthaginian commerce and Roman militarism, between Carthaginian multiculturalism and Roman assimilation, between Carthaginian naval power and Roman territorial expansion, has been used to explore fundamental questions about the nature of power, the relationship between economics and politics, and the fate of civilizations. The question of whether Carthage's destruction was inevitable or contingent continues to provoke debate about determinism and chance in history. The modern nations of North Africa, particularly Tunisia, have embraced Carthaginian heritage as part of their national identity. The image of Hannibal appears on Tunisian currency, and Carthaginian symbols are incorporated into national iconography. The archaeological sites of Carthage and other Carthaginian cities have become important tourist destinations and sources of national pride. The recognition of Carthaginian contributions to North African development has influenced contemporary discussions about identity, heritage, and the relationship between ancient and modern civilizations. The lessons of Carthage for contemporary civilization remain relevant and thought-provoking. The tension between commercial and military power, exemplified in the Carthaginian-Roman conflict, continues to shape international relations. The challenges of maintaining maritime empire and controlling trade routes resonates in an era of global commerce and naval competition. The difficulties of managing diverse, multicultural societies while maintaining political cohesion remain central challenges for modern states. The fate of Carthage, a sophisticated, prosperous civilization destroyed by a more militarily powerful rival, serves as a cautionary tale about the relationship between economic success and military security. The study of Carthage also raises profound questions about the preservation and transmission of cultural heritage. The loss of Carthaginian literature and the filtering of Carthaginian history through hostile sources demonstrates how completely a civilization's voice can be silenced. The archaeological recovery of Carthaginian material culture shows both the possibilities and limitations of reconstructing lost civilizations. The ongoing debates about Carthaginian practices like child sacrifice illustrate the challenges of interpreting evidence when cultural context has been lost. These issues resonate in contemporary discussions about cultural preservation, historical memory, and the responsibilities of dominant civilizations toward those they conquer or absorb. The environmental and ecological insights from Carthaginian agriculture and resource management offer lessons for sustainable development. Carthaginian techniques for maintaining soil fertility, managing water resources, and balancing agricultural production with ecological constraints demonstrated sophisticated understanding of environmental systems. Their ability to make marginal lands productive through careful management and appropriate technology provides models relevant to contemporary agricultural challenges. The eventual degradation of some Carthaginian agricultural lands also offers warnings about the limits of intensive exploitation and the need for long-term environmental stewardship. The economic innovations of Carthage, particularly in international trade and finance, presaged developments that would not fully emerge until the medieval and modern periods. The Carthaginian creation of commercial networks spanning continents, their development of financial instruments to facilitate long-distance trade, and their ability to coordinate complex economic activities across cultural boundaries demonstrated possibilities that would be rediscovered and expanded by later commercial civilizations. The tension between Carthaginian commercial values and Roman military values continues to resonate in debates about the relative importance of economic and military power in international affairs. As we conclude this extensive examination of Carthaginian civilization, we must acknowledge both what we know and what remains forever lost. The Carthaginians built one of antiquity's greatest civilizations, contributing innovations in navigation, commerce, agriculture, and governance that influenced human development for millennia. They demonstrated that commercial prowess could create great power status and that diverse multicultural societies could achieve remarkable success. Their military innovations, particularly under Hannibal's leadership, showed that tactical genius could overcome numerical and material disadvantages, at least temporarily. Yet Carthage also demonstrated the vulnerabilities of commercial civilization when facing determined military aggression. Their dependence on mercenary forces, while providing flexibility, created fatal weaknesses in moments of crisis. Their inability to fully integrate conquered peoples into a unified state, while respecting local autonomy, left them vulnerable to defection and rebellion. Their failure to develop institutions capable of checking Roman expansion, despite early military successes, ultimately doomed their civilization to destruction. The story of Carthage reminds us that history is written by the victors, but that careful scholarship can partially recover the voices of the defeated. Through archaeological investigation, critical analysis of hostile sources, and recognition of Carthaginian influences on successor civilizations, we can appreciate the achievements of this remarkable civilization. The tragedy of Carthage's destruction lies not just in the human suffering it caused, but in the loss of alternative paths of development that Carthaginian civilization represented. In remembering Carthage, we honour not just a lost civilization, but the diversity of human achievement and the multiplicity of paths toward progress. The Carthaginians showed that commercial enterprise could build great cities, that maritime exploration could expand human horizons, and that different peoples could cooperate for mutual benefit. Their destruction by Rome, while perhaps inevitable given the dynamics of ancient imperialism, represents a narrowing of human possibilities and the loss of valuable perspectives on organising society and pursuing prosperity. The legacy of Carthage lives on in the archaeological remains that dot the Mediterranean coastline, in the agricultural techniques still practiced in North Africa, in the trade routes that continue to connect continents, and in the memory of Hannibal's audacious challenge to Roman power. It lives on in the lessons their history provides about the nature of empire, the relationship between commerce and power, and the fate of civilizations in conflict. Most importantly, it lives on in the recognition that human civilization has been enriched by diversity and impoverished by the destruction of unique cultures, a lesson as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago when Carthage fell.